For this video, I'm going to keep the introduction very brief. Yes, as you saw, I'm covering 3 stories in this one. None of them are quite as iconic as the first 2, so I felt like it would be easier to roll them all into one video. With that said, let's get started on the first one of them, The Edge of Destruction. I'm going to do something very unique for the story. I'm going to start off by saying whether or not I recommend it. Kind of. One of the biggest strengths of this story is that it's a 2-parter, making it one of the shortest stories of the classic era. This also makes it very accessible compared to other stories of the era. So if you're a bit curious, but don't want to dedicate your time to a full 7-part story, this one's alright. That said, I find the places this story goes kind of disappointing. I'm saying all this now because I'm about to summarize the first part of the story without giving any spoilers, and I genuinely don't know if I can do that without making it sound like one of the coolest stories ever. So here's the basic summary. The story starts off where the last one ended, with the TARDIS malfunctioning. Everyone was acting a bit suspiciously, and the doors are open. As the story proceeds, the group finds even more things wrong with the TARDIS. For example, there's small things, like the food machine from earlier. The water says it's empty, but it isn't. However, there's also the clocks. For some weird reason, the clocks are unreadable. This isn't just the TARDIS malfunctioning, it also affects Ian's wristwatch. At this point in the story, they have no idea what's happening, and you can really see the fear on their faces. Susan's arguably facing the worst of it though, facing severe paranoia and fear that perhaps something entered the TARDIS from out there.
Well, there's something here, inside the ship.
Later on, when things are escalating even further, and Susan is acting, quite frankly, very suspicious, she says this.
But where would it hide? In one of us.
In case this wasn't already obvious, I love what is being set up here. I mean, I'm not a big fan of horror movies, but I do love scary Doctor Who episodes, and so far, this is pretty scary. There's other stuff happening too. Susan keeps grabbing these scissors for some reason. They get these images on the scanner, but it clearly isn't where they actually are, and when they actually open the door and look outside, there's nothing.
Nothing there! Nothing!
They don't directly address this in the story, they just call what's outside space. But looking outside, we can clearly see that it's not a black void, it's white, which is much more mysterious to me. If it was a black void, I'll just assume they're on the edge of the universe or something like that. A pure white void? There's no really explaining that. I mean, there is, I guess, but that's going into spoiler territory. I don't want to spoil, of course, what's actually happening here in the spoiler-free area, so I'm going to transition into part 2 now. Before I do though, here's my overall thoughts. The first part of the story is very good. The second part also has its nice moments, but overall I think really squanders a lot of the potential the first part set up. I don't recommend this story nearly as much as the first 2. The first one was the first Doctor Who story. The second one was the first Dalek story. This one has nothing going for it in terms of relevance or being that important to the overall story, but it is very short, and it is quite entertaining, so if what I've set up sounds interesting to you, consider watching it. But now I'm going to start spoiling things, starting with the answer to the overall mystery of this story, so if you're considering watching it, you should probably leave now. Anyway, you've been warned. Well, as promised, I'm going to start by spoiling the overall mystery. So what's going on? Why are all these weird things happening? So this spring broke in the button that makes the TARDIS go back in time, and the TARDIS went too far back in time. They're at the beginning of a solar system, none of them are possessed, there's nothing inside the ship. All of Susan's weird behavior and wanting to stab people for some reason was just her being paranoid, I guess, and bumping her head. I don't know, I guess bumping her head just made her a bit more stabby or something. The TARDIS has been giving them hints the whole time about what's happening, which explains some things, but doesn't really explain how the clocks got weird, especially their wristwatches. As I said, their wristwatches also got affected, and I don't think the TARDIS could do that. But yeah, this spring got broken on this button, which, in case you didn't notice, is labeled with Sharpie. So yeah, I just wanted to get that disappointment out of the way. You can see why I'm disappointed, right? I mean, it didn't have to be that someone was actually possessed, but with them setting all of these weird things up, and with Susan acting so oddly, I really thought that's where they were going, which would have been very interesting. I'm really getting ahead of myself though. With this context in mind, let's go through the episode in a bit more detail and look at each of the hints the TARDIS gives them along the way, and why really a lot of them don't make any sense. Once again, this story starts off where the last one left off, which I will say again, I do quite like. That isn't something you see that often with the new show, so I appreciate that. At the beginning of the episode, everyone's acting a bit weird, but I'm kind of fine with that. I mean, they were all just knocked unconscious, and they're all kind of groggy, so it makes sense. Still though, it's undeniable that their intention is to make you a bit suspicious of everyone.
I know you.
You're working late tonight, Miss Wright?
Ian and Barbara are mostly fine though. They get back to us quite quickly. The Doctor, however, has a bit of a cut on his head and also feels sore on the back of his neck. Susan also has the same pain on the back of her neck. Weird. We also learn that the Doctor has a heart. Emphasis on A.
His heart seems alright.
Obviously this part is a bit contradicted by more modern stuff, but hey, maybe Ian just couldn't find the second one. I also meant that figuratively though, as we find out that the Doctor does have a heart, as in he does care about, screwing over Susan a bit.
I can't take you back, Susan. I can't.
This is probably referring to Gallifrey or their home planet, but it could also refer to Earth since Susan wanted to go back there as well. As the three who are conscious are theorizing, Susan states that the TARDIS can't crash, which, I mean, I don't really need to say that that's contradicted by more modern stuff. I'm pretty sure the classic stuff has instances of them crashing as well. I mean hell, they've kind of crashed in this episode, but again, I'm getting ahead of myself. Honestly though, Susan might just not know what she's talking about, because in the same scene, she also claims that the doors can't open on their own, and yet, well, they do that, like in the next scene. It's worth noting here, the first of my nitpicks. For some reason, they can't see outside the doors. They only figure out that there's nothing out there later in the second episode, when both of them are standing right next to the door. But it's pretty obvious from a distance what's happening out there, right? And by that I mean nothing, of course. Anyway though, the door continues to open whenever Ian walks away from it, and close again whenever he walks towards it.
Did you do that?
We haven't moved.
Again, I feel like the story does a genuinely good job of being eerie. Already at this point, Susan comes up with the theory that I mentioned in the first part of this episode, that maybe something forced its way into the TARDIS. As Susan panics and runs to the control panel, she suddenly faints. That's the next weird thing about this episode. Whenever they approach the controls, or at least whenever they approach certain controls, they suddenly feel a sudden pain in the back of their head, and they are knocked unconscious. Again, I've already spoiled that the TARDIS is doing most of these things on its own, which means for each of these hints, I'm going to discuss whether or not I think the TARDIS could do them. With this one, yeah, I can see the TARDIS being able to do this, I guess. It's a bit weird for the TARDIS to have basically weapon systems inside itself, but I guess it could have some way of perhaps harming people who are trying to touch parts of it. So as Barbara is tending to the Doctor, Ian takes Susan to a bed to rest. He then goes and grabs some water. Again, for some reason it registers as empty, but he does get some water out of it. The group counts this as a hint later, and while I'm fully sure that the TARDIS could do this, I don't really see how it's a hint really. Like what's telling them? They never really say what it means, they just say, oh that's a hint, the water says it's empty but it isn't. Maybe it's just a way to tell them that something's wrong, or not as it seems. Anyway, Ian then returns to Susan and, okay, what the hell?
Who are you? Ah! Ah!
So I don't think I even have to say this, but I'm quite certain the TARDIS couldn't, and honestly wouldn't do this. This is probably my biggest issue with this episode. The way Susan acts throughout it really heavily sets up the idea that she could be possessed or something. The way she acts is just really aggressive. By the end of the episode, it seems like the only reason she acts like this is because she bumped her head. Or more specifically, maybe because the TARDIS shocked her, or whatever that was. But regardless, that shouldn't impact her personality this much. Sure, I can see her being a bit paranoid maybe, but this goes beyond paranoid. She's like a serial killer at the moment. Anyway, returning to the other three, the Doctor is, unsurprisingly, a bit concerned about Susan, although he chalks it up to just memory loss, which, again, I really disagree with. Memory loss, to my knowledge at least, doesn't fundamentally change your personality and morals. Anyway, the Doctor seems desperate for any ideas about what's happening. Barbara brings up what Susan said, but the Doctor finds the idea of something entering the TARDIS ridiculous and completely illogical.
I mean, things aren't always very logical, are they?
I think that's actually a pretty realistic piece of dialogue considering her position. I mean, a few days ago she didn't even know a time machine could exist. Of course she would question the logic of things like that. The Doctor heads over the console to check for any malfunctions, at which point Ian warns him not to, because of what's happened to Susan. The Doctor then takes complete credit for this idea.
I'm glad I thought of that, yes. Come along, come along.
Not even surprised at this point, as Ian tells Barbara to keep an eye on Susan as he helps the Doctor, we see Susan in the background, once again being way too ominous. Like, this isn't how she would act if she was being paranoid. The look on her face and basically everything about her body language much more spells out that she's being malicious than paranoid. As Barbara returns to Susan, she asks her if she remembers her.
You're Barbara.
So we can't really chalk anything she does from this point on up to her just forgetting who they are. She knows that this is Barbara. She knows that she can be trusted to some extent, so anything she does from this point is with the knowledge that this is Barbara, and presumably that that's Ian. This scene is a great scene, or at least it would be if it turned out Susan was possessed. The first time watching the scene, I was genuinely quite creeped out. A lot of the dialogue is incredibly ominous. It just kind of falls apart once you have the knowledge that, well, Susan's completely fine. She hit her head a bit, but she's not possessed or anything. This is all just her theories, and none of it is true.
Susan, why don't you give me those scissors? Give them to me.
When Susan was grabbing those scissors earlier, she overheard Ian and Barbara mentioning that they shouldn't talk to her about the possibility of something being inside the ship. This makes her much more paranoid, of course. But again, doesn't really justify what she's doing here.
I noticed the shadows before. So silent in the ship.
Weird. Shadows, silence, enemies disguising themselves as your allies. Where have I heard these terms before? Oh no.
Hey, who turned out the lights?
Okay, so yeah, obviously that was never going to happen. If this episode was the first appearance of the Vashta Narada, you almost certainly would have heard about it before. So, no, obviously that wasn't going to happen. But again, come on, you can see how all of these weird hints are leading me towards thinking there's something really ominous happening. But none of this goes anywhere. She's just paranoid.
The doors were open.
But where would it hide?
In one of us.
I find it funny that Susan is the one who brought up that idea, despite being obvious suspect number one of who could possibly be possessed here. Anyway, Barbara tries to laugh off this idea, but it's clearly getting to her.
They'd simply laugh at us.
Supposing there isn't a fault.
You must be clairvoyant.
Ian informs her two that they couldn't find a single mechanical fault when investigating. Again, this seems a bit weird in the future. I mean, the TARDIS knows that they're trying to figure out what's going on. You expect the TARDIS to give them some kind of hint at this point, right? This is technically correct information, because the spring being stuck isn't actually a malfunction, at least according to the Doctor. But I mean, still, the TARDIS could have sent them in that direction somehow, I think. The Doctor and Susan notice that they have a pain in the back of their necks, at which point they look at Barbara and Ian for the first time, with a hint of suspicion in their eyes. I didn't really mention this in part 1, but yeah, a big part of this next part of the story, or at least a decent chunk of it, is that the Doctor is quite suspicious of those two. Which I can understand to some extent, but again, may I remind you... Yeah, I feel like logically, that's the point where the Doctor should have dropped the idea that Ian and Barbara could be responsible for this, but he continues to blame them after this. As it turns out, the controls for the scanners are safe, so the Doctor accesses them. At this point, they get some pictures on the screen, but they're not moving, so it's clear they aren't actually there. As the pictures show up, the doors open and then close. More specifically, they close as the scanners show a picture of a planet that the Doctor and Susan went to before they met Ian and Barbara, where they almost lost the TARDIS. Again, I like the implication that they did some minor adventuring before meeting Ian and Barbara. I'm sure they must have been safer though, because without Ian and Barbara, the Doctor and Susan would be dead many times over by now. At the same time as that planet appears on the screen, they also hear a loud noise coming from outside, like a roaring. Again, this doesn't make much sense with the knowledge of what's actually happening here, but maybe the TARDIS is just playing the noise and making it sound realistic? At this point, the Doctor finally mentions the TARDIS's memory banks. In the previous story, Susan mentioned this to Barbara, but the Doctor hasn't brought this up at all, and this is the first time Ian's hearing about any of this. The Doctor seems confused by this.
Are you sure? I thought I did.
This has no plot relevance, by the way. I just find it funny how negligent the Doctor is. The scanners, that were previously just showing a couple planets they'd been to before, suddenly zooms out to show a planet. Then it zooms out further and further until suddenly there's an explosion of light. At this point, the Doctor finally formally accuses them.
You're the cause of this disaster. And you both knocked both Susan and I unconscious.
Again, it's immersive, okay? The line flops are immersive. He accuses them of using his ship as blackmail in order to make him send them home. That part makes some sense. If they were going to harm his ship for some reason, that would be the reason. However, again, they don't really know how the ship works, so I don't know why he thinks they could possibly do this. He treats them like idiots for a couple episodes, and all of a sudden he thinks that they're capable of doing this, when even he can't figure out the cause.
But you checked everything yourself and you couldn't find anything wrong with it.
No, sir. We checked everything, you and I.
At this point, Barbara's finally had enough of the Doctor's crap and calls him out on how much of an idiot he's been. Which honestly, I do find kind of satisfying.
Do you realize, you stupid old man, that you'd have died in the Cave of Skulls if Ian hadn't made fire for you? And what about what we went through against the Daleks? And all because you tricked us into going down to the city.
But
Accuse us! You ought to go down on your hands and knees and thank us.
If a companion did this to basically any other Doctor, I think it would come off as incredibly annoying, but here, it makes complete sense. She's completely right. Anyway, this is the point where we get that weird thing with the clocks from earlier, which once again, much like with Susan trying to stab everyone, makes no sense for the TARDIS to be able to do this. The clock on the TARDIS? Maybe, but they have wristwatches. That just makes no sense. I really like the acting here though. They're clearly horrified and have no idea what's happening. I have no idea what's happening either though, because why can the TARDIS do this? Something like this would make a bit more sense in the currently ongoing stories of Doctor Who, since Russell T Davies introduced these godlike creatures that could do something like this, but at this point in the show, it just makes no sense. There's nothing fantastical going on here at the moment. This is meant to be pure sci-fi. At this point, as everyone else is panicking, the Doctor brings out tea, which is suspicious, but even Ian finds it suspicious, so I'm not going to really comment on that. Barbara heads off to bed at this point. Susan then leaves, and as she does, she tells the Doctor that he should probably apologize to Barbara, which is weird. Minutes ago she was all stabby and stuff, and now she's being normal? Ian also tells the Doctor that he should apologize to Barbara, to which the Doctor responds that he doesn't have time. Okay, we'll only take a couple seconds. Even Ian brings this up though, so this is clearly just a flimsy excuse. We then get one of the funniest lines of the old show.
Frankly, Doctor, I find it hard to keep pace with you.
You mean to keep one jump ahead. That you will never be. You need my knowledge and ability to apply it. And then you need my experience to gain the fullest results.
Much like with the "it's impossible to hide from them" line from the last story, I'm sorry, but I'm going to be using this clip a lot. I mean, it's just so relevant so many times. In fact, now that we have that sound clip, let's get a compilation of the last couple stories with that sound clip in the background.
You mean to keep one jump ahead. That you will never be. You need my knowledge and ability to apply it. And then you need my experience to gain the fullest results.
Anyway, if the Doctor wasn't being sinister enough already, he then has this line.
One man's law is another man's crime. Sleep on it, Chesterton. Sleep on it.
Anyway, Susan, who's still in not stabby mode, goes and apologizes to Barbara on the Doctor's behalf, and they all go to sleep, seemingly quite deeply, other than the Doctor, who goes to the console and is then, I don't know about attacked, but like held by someone off camera. And the episode ends there, without revealing who's holding him. I mean, it's Ian, of course. It kind of has to be Ian. There's no one else on the ship, as I've said. But man, though, could you imagine? Oh well. Immediately after this, Ian falls on the floor unconscious, clearly zapped by the console, or whatever the console's doing to them, I guess. Unfortunate timing, as now he can't justify himself, and Barbara has to justify his actions for him. At this point, Susan goes back to evil Susan, but only for like a few seconds to side with the Doctor here and agree that Ian is acting weirdly, at which point the Doctor suggests the idea of kicking them off the ship, and she pivots back to being normal again. It's impossible to keep track at this point. Fortunately, from this point on, she acts mostly normally, so yeah, I guess she just hit her head. Susan accurately points out that there's no way Ian and Barbara could have done all this, but the Doctor's just seeing red at this point.
But you can't open the doors.
Don't underestimate my powers, young lady.
Okay, as immersive as that line flub was, I'll admit it made the line a lot less cool.
It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground!
Don't underestimate my powers, young lady.
As the Doctor and Barbara bicker a bit more, Susan suddenly runs up and informs the Doctor that now everything's going wrong, whereas previously nothing was apparently. This is enough for the Doctor to finally acknowledge that, yeah, there's no way Ian and Barbara did this. Only 5 minutes into the episode, so admittedly they weren't being blamed for that long, but it was still a pretty important part of the episode.
The ship is on the point of disintegration.
Damn it! I really thought I was going to use the Family Guy clip again.
You're not to blame. All four of us aren't to blame.
Okay, I feel like I'm going insane here. Tell me what you hear when you hear that line. Because I hear all four of us aren't to blame, as in none of us are to blame. But every transcript I've read online says the line is all four of us are to blame, which I guess it kind of sounds like that as well, but that makes no sense. None of them are really to blame for any of this. Well, as I'll turn out, the Doctor's kind of at fault, but that's beside the point. He says all four of us are to blame. What the hell did Susan do? I mean, other than get weirdly stabby, I guess. That was kind of weird of her, but it has nothing to do with what's happening in the episode. At this point, Ian wakes up for the most part, and seems back to normal, maybe a bit groggy though.
A drink you gave us.
Oh, a mere harmless sleeping drug.
That's a really weird way to downplay it, Doctor. Imagine being drugged by someone, and then when you come to, they're like, oh, why are you so mad? At least they didn't poison you.
We're on the brink of destruction.
Okay, you know what? Screw it, close enough. Bring out the Family Guy clip.
He said it! He said it!
At this point, they all start theory crafting what could possibly be going on. At which point, Barbara is suspiciously quick to get the right answer. She almost immediately figures out that the TARDIS has been giving them hints the whole time. Barbara realizes this when Susan brings up that the warnings flash up every 15 seconds, giving them a way to track time.
We had time taken away from us, and now it's been given back to us because it's running out.
When the TARDIS does that, it means they're on track, by the way, which they figure out the second time it happens. Again, Barbara is really speedrunning this at this point. At this point, the column of the TARDIS rises, but doesn't go back down. Susan identifies that this means the power inside the console is trying to escape. This, unsurprisingly, would be very bad for everyone involved.
We have 10 minutes to survive.
Again, I'm really skipping over a lot of stuff here, because a lot of this is just them figuring this stuff out, but it really is mostly Barbara. The only thing the boys determine is a theory that it's possible that a magnetic force as strong as the solar system could force the power to move up, pushing the column up. This is the point where Barbara really starts solving everything.
I think perhaps we've been given nothing else but clues.
Like the food machine, you mean?
Yes.
Again, they've really never elaborated on that. I have no idea what that clue was meant to mean.
Originally, the machine wasn't at fault, we were. And it's been trying to tell us so ever since.
If you've watched my other videos, you may remember when I said this in my Unearthly Child review. You could also justify this as the TARDIS wanting them to find it, but that seems unlikely to me, because the idea of the TARDIS being more smart than just a machine wouldn't be established for another couple episodes. And yeah, that was a reference to this story. Obviously, this isn't implying that the TARDIS is properly sentient, but it is interesting how it lines up. Anyway, as the Doctor brings up the idea of a magnetic force as powerful as the solar system, the TARDIS shakes again, indicating that they're right. And at this point, Barbara realizes that.
You see? The machine has been warning us all along.
At this point, Barbara determines that the part of the console that's safe for them to touch is probably the part the TARDIS wants them to touch. At which point the Doctor says this.
We'll try it, but we're clutching at straws. Now.
I'd like to think the TARDIS shook there, less because they're on the right track, and more so because it's frustrated that the Doctor's still not trusting Barbara fully. Anyway, the part they can touch is the scanner, which they already did earlier. As he goes to manage the scanners, he gets the girls to go by the doors, as before they were opening and closing in sync with the scanner. At this point, he turns to Ian and says this.
We have 5 minutes only. When the end does come, they won't know anything about it.
This is quite sweet of the Doctor, albeit a bit misogynistic. I mean, why couldn't Barbara face the end with him? She's the one who's been figuring all this out. She's capable. It's also worth noting that it's been 3 minutes since he said it was 10 minutes, which means theoretically they should have only 2 minutes left at this point. I don't want to nitpick this too much, but I will just point that out because I know I pointed that out quite a bit with the Chibnall episode that made this similar mistake. They don't want to seem like a hypocrite. In this episode, they also survive for longer than the Doctor says they should. Although this also does make a bit more sense, since this Doctor is less experienced and hasn't figured out exactly what was happening, like that version of the Doctor had. As they use the scanners again, they get the same pictures as they got last time. As England appears on the monitor, the doors open, showing a white void. Kind of rude, I feel like there's a bit more in Britain than that, but okay, Doctor Who.
Nothing there! Nothing!
As the planet the Doctor and Susan almost lost their TARDIS on appears on screen, which is clearly a bit more hazardous and wild, the doors close again.
Whenever there's a good picture, the door's open because it's safe for us to go outside.
At this point, the Doctor finally chips in a bit, and he points out that the journey afterwards, the part where there's the planet and then it zoomed out and it zoomed out further, and then there's a blinding flash, is the TARDIS's journey. This next scene is probably the one scene that I'd say it's worth watching for yourself if you're going to watch the story. It's genuinely a really good scene. At this point, the Doctor finds out he's at the beginning of the creation of the solar system, and he's clearly very excited. He almost starts crying a bit. This is like the one part of this Doctor that's completely consistent with the more modern interpretations, the love of exploration and discovery. This is also kind of the educational part of the story. I mean, there's a second one later, but here he just briefly describes how solar systems are formed. At this point, Ian asks the question they really should have just been asking from the beginning: what did the Doctor put into the console? As it turns out, the Doctor had tried to get them back to Earth, but he also wanted them back in the 1960s, of course, and the events of the Skaro episode were far into the future, which I'm not even going to cover right now, but it really doesn't make much sense with like how often the Daleks show up in modern Earth. Whatever though. Point is, the Doctor pressed the button that makes the TARDIS go back in time fast. Yeah, no, I'm not kidding there. There's literally just a button that he has to hold down, and if he holds it down, the TARDIS goes back in time really fast. So he and Ian investigate the button.
But how does it work?
Well, you merely press it down and...
It's stuck.
A part of me enjoys how comically mundane the answer to all this was. However, well, first of all, it's still a bit disappointing. Again, all of the setup with the possibility of an intruder, or one of them being possessed, was very interesting to me. But the other thing is, how on earth does this make any sense? The TARDIS is incredibly advanced, and you're telling me that this button can just get stuck and send them all hurtling back to the distant past? And worst of all, the TARDIS has no way of directly telling them what the problem was? If the TARDIS's AI is smart enough to figure this problem out, it should be smart enough to have like a console or something where they can just write out, hey, this is the problem, guys. And that's the problem resolved. 2 minutes late according to the Doctor's calculations, but again, this version of him is less experienced. At this point, we get the second educational part, as Susan is confused about what went wrong.
But why didn't the fault locator tell us?
Well, the switch hadn't broken down.
Apparently, again, there was literally no other way for the TARDIS to tell them, hey, the spring is stuck, other than all that weird, bizarre crap. Hey, speaking of which, I mean, the TARDIS couldn't have done that. Again though, that's never really directly stated by the plot. In fact, all Susan says is that it's space out there.
Nothing but space!
So maybe it was like a filming issue? Maybe having it pure black out there just didn't look as good? I don't know. Anyway, the Doctor gives Susan a basic rundown of how springs work.
When I put my thumb on there, the light comes on.
There's kind of a sweet moment here, where even the characters laugh off how ridiculously simple it all was.
I think your old grandfather is going a tiny little bit around the bend.
Well, by characters I obviously mean the Doctor and Susan. As Susan points out, Ian and Barbara are still quite upset by the whole thing. At this point, we're seeing some of the Doctor's excellent social skills in action.
Yes,
Don't bother to say anything, Doctor. You know, there are times when I can read every thought on your face.
Really? Yes. And I always thought that you were a young man without any recrimination in you.
Nice one, Doctor. Unfortunately for him, Barbara is less convinced. At which point, he gives her possibly an even worse apology. Step 1 to apologizing, according to the Doctor, claim that their way of thinking is illogical and drive purely based on instinct, whereas you, of course, are very logical.
Your instinct and intuition against my logic, and you succeeded.
This will help remind them that you think they are a moron. Step 2 to a good apology: never, at any point, under any circumstances, actually say the word sorry. I mean, you can dance around it and be a bit polite, but if the word sorry ever comes out during an apology, it's a bad apology, because that means you did something wrong, which you never could do, right, Doctor? Anyway, Barbara, who for some reason doesn't appreciate the Doctor's kind apology, storms off.
I have underestimated that young lady in the past. Shut out.
I'm sorry, what?
Shut out, shut out, shut out.
That one wasn't even close to right. We then cut to later, when the Doctor finally takes a second chance at apologizing to Barbara, and to his credit, this one is slightly better.
Because I accused you unjustly, you were determined to prove me wrong. So you put your mind to the problem, and luckily you solved it.
At least he didn't essentially downplay her intelligence this time. However, in case you didn't notice, he still didn't say the word sorry at any point. Anyway, she suddenly forgives him, which I mean, fair enough, he is very charming, but still though, I feel like he could have apologized at the very least. As the episode wraps up, we get yet another milestone in Doctor Who history, the point where the Doctor first references meeting a human historical figure.
You know, I acquired that ulster from Gilbert and Sullivan. Oh, really? I thought it was made for two.
The episode then wraps up with the girls outside in the snow, where they have found a very big footprint.
Must be made by a giant.
You'd think this leads into the Abominable Snowman story. However, no. The next episode is the purely historical episode, Marco Polo. However, I'll get into that after I give my overall thoughts on this one. So what do I think overall? It's hard for me to really dislike this story for a couple reasons. First of all, as I've said before, it is very short, and that is a big plus with these old Doctor Who stories. It also isn't that bad really. I feel like I just expected it to go one way, and I was really hoping it would, and then it just went the complete other direction, going from a really intimidating concept of something infiltrating the TARDIS to such a basic malfunction that you just have to wonder how the TARDIS cannot deal with it on its own. There are also just pieces to the puzzle that make no sense. The biggest hint they had was the clocks, but how on earth did the TARDIS do that? Even accepting that it can do that, there's also the outside, which again, might have just been a technical limitation of the people on set, but I mean I still think it's worth noting. And there's also the fact that Susan was acting so strange. That's a big factor in why I didn't really like the story the first time watching it. With how Susan was acting, I was expecting there to be an explanation for her behaviour, but there really wasn't. Overall, do I think the story is worth watching? To some extent. I think all of these stories are to some extent worth watching. I think, considering how short it is, it's really not the worst option you have. But I'd never really recommend it over the previous two stories, unless it really appeals to you that it's very short compared to those two. Because overall it's just less important to the overall Doctor Who history, and, well, it's not that much worse, but it isn't that important. That's pretty much all I have to say about the story, so let's move on to Marco Polo. Now I know what some of you are probably thinking looking at these visuals. Man, this guy must have struggled a lot to get this past copyright, he's only using still images. Well, no unfortunately, that is the episode. This will be the first instance of me reviewing a story that has been, for the most part, lost to time. We still have all the audio, fortunately, so it is a complete story, but from a visuals perspective, we only really get these still images. Which is a shame, because these sets and costumes look pretty impressive from what we can see of them. I'm going to leave this review pretty short, because to be honest, do I recommend this story? Not really. Which is annoying, because I don't really dislike the story, it's just that because this is the only way it can be watched, I feel like most people won't be able to sit through it the whole way. I've been watching most of these stories with my parents. This is the only one that I had to watch on my own, mostly for my mother's sake. We can hardly convince her to watch the good episodes. I personally didn't really mind it at all. It's a decent story, and I don't think the presentation makes it that much worse for me personally, but I understand how, for most people, this is just kind of unwatchable. So do I recommend it? Not really, unless you're really dedicated to watching all of the first Doctor stories, in which case, yeah, definitely, it's still watchable, and it's decent, so yeah. The story itself is pretty standard. You'll notice that a lot of the first Doctor's historical stories are quite different to modern ones, that being because they never mix with the sci-fi aspects of the show. This will be the case for most of the historical episodes of the first Doctor's run, as well as some of the second Doctor's historical episodes as well. They focus purely on historical elements, which means there's no aliens or anything like that for them to face off against. The threat in these episodes is usually quite simply that the group is trying to get back to their TARDIS, but for some reason they simply can't. In this one, it's because it's being taken by Marco Polo to Kublai Khan as a gift. So pretty much, the entire plot is the group trying to get back into the TARDIS without Marco Polo noticing. Sometimes they try to negotiate with them, especially Ian. This is pretty much how all these historical stories go, although I will say there's a lot more talking in this one, since Marco Polo is reasonable. He simply doesn't understand the situation that well. It also doesn't help that he's pretty desperate for Kublai Khan's favour, as he needs his permission if he ever wants to go home. And that's pretty much the whole plot, them caravanning across China, trying to get to Kublai Khan, There's also this guy who's a decent antagonist. He's an envoy of a rebellious warlord, and he's interested in taking the TARDIS for himself. That's probably the only thing that really makes the story stand out. The group is very honest about the TARDIS's functions in this story.
The Doctor calls it the TARDIS. Where are the wheels? It doesn't have any. Then how does it move? Through the air.
It's kind of funny how honest they are, and Marco Polo just believes it because he's been experiencing mysticism recently, so he's just like, okay, I guess it could fly.
Are you of the Buddhist faith? No, why?
There are a couple other negatives I forgot to mention before, so I'm just going to put them in here. The first one is that this episode's kind of racist, I think. It comes off as a bit racist at points. Not that much so though, just enough that you can tell it's from the 1960s. The other negative is that once again this story is 7 parts long, so much like with the Dalek story, it's hard to recommend with that knowledge in mind. That, combined with the fact that it's basically a glorified slideshow, makes it very hard to recommend the story to anyone other than the most dedicated of fans, in which case you're going to watch it anyway, so why are you watching this? That's pretty much all I have to say about the story without going into spoilers. It's charming, the characters are kind of cool, the setting's nice, there's a bunch of stuff to like about the story, but the presentation really makes it hard to watch from a modern perspective. Anyway, I'll now be discussing spoilers for this story, you've been warned. At the beginning of the reconstruction, there's a brief interview with the actor who played Marco Polo. Obviously this isn't part of the story, but it's still nice, I guess.
If one could choose a Doctor Who story that should never have been junked, it must be Marco Polo. Not because I was in it, but because the sets and the costumes at that particular time were absolutely unique and I think pretty wonderful.
Then there's also this part which, again, technically wasn't part of the original, but this is part of the story, so I will include it, where we get a brief prologue and at the end of the story an epilogue, with Marco Polo in the future journaling about this experience, which is a nice touch.
Let me tell you of that, the strangest of all adventures. It all started 35 years ago in 1289 on the plain of Pamir, the roof of the world.
He said it! He said it!
Okay, fine, that one was kind of cheating. I mean, it wasn't even part of the original story, it was part of this prologue that was added in the reconstruction. Still though, that is the touch of the episode, so I'm going to use it. We then get the opening title screen, which is colorized? I don't know, can this be counted as colorized? No idea, but it gives me an excuse to use a new frame for my video, so I'm going to take it. We then go back to where the last story left off, with them on this large mountain, looking at what seems to be a large footprint, although as Ian points out, it could just be a regular footprint that looks bigger due to the snow melting. They then look around and try and guess where they are. They're pretty certain they're on Earth, but they don't know where exactly.
Could be the Andes.
Himalayas. Roof of the world.
The roof of the world.
Okay, thank God. Now I can use it, right?
Yeah, there it is! There it is!
Nice. Anyway, the one difference from the last story that I think is worth noting is that the Doctor doesn't seem to have any of his development from the last story, as he starts whining the second they're out of the TARDIS. Then he finds out that it's malfunctioning again, and he gets even more mad.
Serious, we could freeze to death.
Serious? Are you telling... There's no need for you to tell me that, really.
He's almost uncharacteristically mad at the beginning of this story, it's kind of weird.
Even if I do find the fault, I don't suppose I shall be able to repair it before it gets dark, and then we shall all freeze to death.
Ian and Barbara go out to look for fuel, but on their way, Barbara gets tired and decides to take a rest as Ian goes on further. Then this thing appears. Now you're probably thinking, didn't this guy just say that there's no aliens in this episode? And yeah, there aren't, you'll see. Barbara mistakes this thing for an animal and screams for Ian to return, but by the time he does, it's gone. But it does leave a footprint. Still though, Ian's doubtful.
To tell you the truth, I thought it was made by a fur boot.
No, Ian, I'm sure it wasn't human.
If it were, that means there's shelter nearby. Quick, up to it. It's our only chance of shelter.
Come on, Grandfather.
All right, yes.
Unlike what usually happens with this sort of trope, where someone believes that there's a creature nearby and someone else doesn't believe them, it turns out Ian was completely right. It was made by a fur boot, as it turns out there's Mongolians nearby, traveling through the mountains. Once again, much like with the Caveman and Dalek episodes, the language barrier is never addressed, so I guess they just have some way of communicating with them. Unfortunately, the group of Mongols is led by Tagana, this episode's antagonist, so it doesn't go well.
In these parts live evil spirits who take our likeness to deceive us and then lead us to our deaths.
Fortunately though, just before the Mongols can strike, a European man appears and tells him to calm down. The European man invokes Kublai Khan's authority and the Mongols stand down. He then invites them to their caravan, as the doctor already seems to be sick with mountain sickness, which, I guess they've been there for a while now, but the episode's only 10 minutes in, so it does feel a bit silly. Barbara still doesn't know exactly who this guy is, which seems a bit unusual to me. She's a history teacher, and this is a European man who's invoking Kublai Khan's authority. I feel like that kind of narrows it down a bit. In the next scene though, as they talk over soup, she does demonstrate her historical knowledge as she does narrow it down to Marco Polo. In the same scene, Ian also demonstrates his scientific knowledge, which is nice.
I had a European in his service. He was a Venetian, and his name...
I'm afraid the liquid is not too warm, but the cold here is so intense it even robs the flame of its heat.
Oh, it's excellent nourishment, sir.
The cold can't affect the heat of the flame, sir. The liquid boils at a lower temperature because there's so little air up here.
You mean the air is responsible?
Well, the lack of it. Just as the lack of it is responsible for the doctor's mountain sickness.
Is your name Marco Polo?
It is, my lady, and may I ask who you are?
Oh, we're travellers, yes. That's my grandchild, Susan, and that's Miss Wright, and that's Charlton.
Chesterton. Ian Chesterton.
Marco introduces the group to his group, including Tigana, the warlord I mentioned, as well as Ping Shou, who's a girl around Susan's age. I don't want to get into every single line in this story, but I really need to credit this one, because I really like the writing here.
We travel to Shangtu.
Shangtu. That's in China, isn't it?
China? I do not know this place. Shangtu is in Cathay.
Oh, silly of me. Yes, of course, Cathay.
Considering it's a children's show, I was kind of expecting Barbara to turn to Susan and say, oh yeah, they used to call China Cafe, but they don't do that, which I like, because it feels more realistic this way. You know, it'd be kind of awkward if Marco Polo overheard her saying that. Speaking of which, the realistic dialogue continues as the doctor asks Marco Polo what year it is and where they are, which of course he is concerned by.
How long have you been travelling? It is 1289, and this is the plain of Pamir, known to those who travel to Cathay as the roof of the world.
The roof of the world?
Okay, I'm sorry, I can't keep doing it. I can't keep doing this bit, but they just keep giving me opportunities.
Oh, that's why they call it that.
The group then goes to rest for the night. As they rest, Susan and Ping Shou talk a bit more, and again, the realism continues, as Susan is quite shocked to hear that Ping Shou is being married off.
Well, how old are you? I am in my 16th year. Well, so am I.
She's even more shocked to hear that Ping Shou hasn't even met her fiancé, and only knows that he's very important and 75 years old.
He's a very important man. Well, that's a good start.
Damn, Susan, way to get your priorities in order. At the same time, Tigana complains to Marco that he didn't let him kill them. At that point, Marco brings up that they can't kill them just because they look and sound different to them, which made me realize that to Marco, these guys are just as foreign as the Mongolians. I mean, Britain and Venice aren't that far apart, but keeping in mind that these guys are also from the future, and therefore talk differently to how he's used to, they probably come off as quite foreign. Now is as good a time as any to say I really like Tigana's dialogue in this story. Much like with the caveman story and how they interpret the world, I love to hear how he interprets the TARDIS.
It just stands there like a warlord's tomb on one end. It is not large enough to carry 4 people.
The group, excluding the Doctor since he's still sick, travel to the TARDIS the next morning to discuss it more. This is what I showed in part 1 a bit. They explain to Marco that the TARDIS can fly, and while he seems a bit confused, he states that he's already seen Buddhist monks make things float, so he's not that surprised.
I do not understand it, but I have seen it.
Marco tries to enter, but the group explains that only the Doctor has the key, and only he can make it fly. They also explain to him that it's been damaged, which again isn't a lie. They really have been quite truthful so far. Marco says they have a sledge made to carry it. Back at the tents, the Doctor compliments Ping Shou on her soup.
This smells very, very good. What is it?
Bean sprout soup, my lord.
Allow me. Oh, it's delicious.
I feel like I have to address this, because while this would normally be very normal for the Doctor, this is very out of character for the first Doctor. There's a couple ideas I have in mind for why this could be the case. The first one is just that Ping Shou reminds him of his granddaughter, which would make sense, but at the same time, he's also pretty kind to Marco Polo, for a time at least, we'll get into that, as well as some of the other people he encounters during the story. This is never addressed by the writers directly, so there's no way of knowing exactly why he's so kind to these people. One of the theories I had though, which I quite like, is simply because of these people's interest in exploration. The Doctor made it clear he had a specific hatred of the time period of the 1960s, which I wonder if that's because maybe humanity had grown too arrogant at that point, feeling like it had already discovered everything and knew all there was to know. But at this point, Marco and his group don't know much about the world, they're still adventuring, and so maybe the Doctor has more of an interest in them and more appreciation of them because of their explorative spirit. I don't know, again, none of this is addressed by the writers, but I'm just trying to think of why the Doctor would specifically be more kind to these people when he was otherwise so rude to other humans in the past. Anyway, we also get some more useful context about Tegana and why he is here.
The warlord Tegana is a special emissary from the camp of a great Mongol lord called Nogai, who has been at war with Kublai Khan. And Tegana travels to Kublai's court to discuss the armistice terms.
Yes, well, for an emissary of peace, I must say he has a rather bloodthirsty habit, hasn't he?
Marco returns and explains that they're all going to Lok, a town near the Gobi Desert. He also tells the Doctor he can't try and repair the TARDIS until they've arrived at Lok, as the Mongols still suspect them of being evil spirits. This frustrates the Doctor for a second, but again, he's being very reasonable here compared to how he usually acts.
You saved our lives, Mr. Marco, and the least we can do is to respect your wishes.
We get some narration from Marco as we get a map visual showing their journey. I think this was part of the reconstruction. I don't think this was part of the original episode, but I don't know for sure. As they arrive though, I can definitely see what the actor meant by saying that the set design and costumes in this episode were really good. Obviously we only get the still images, but it seems quite impressive. At this point, we get yet another classic Doctor Who joke. Much like with the last story where the Doctor referenced meeting a historical figure, I feel like Doctor Who's made this joke many times before.
I think it's fab.
Fab? What does that do then?
Well, it means wonderful. It's a word we often use on Earth.
It's funny to see a show from the 1960s, which is now the past, make a joke about how modern lingo would be seen as weird to people in the past. Wait a second, what did Susan just say?
It's a word we often use on Earth.
I can't tell if that was a mistake with the script or the actress saying their line wrong, but this is Earth. That's a very strange mistake to make. Ian then comes to inform the Doctor that the TARDIS has been set up in the courtyard, but before the Doctor can go to work on it, a Mongol guard stops him. Marco Polo then explains to the group that he has been stuck in China for many years now, and he wishes to return, but when he asked the Khan to return, he wasn't allowed to. The Doctor, however, fails to see how this is related to his TARDIS.
I shall offer him a gift so magnificent that he will not be able to refuse me.
You mean to give the Doctor's caravan to him?
You're mad!
You can make another.
What in thinking?
From this point on, the story is pretty much entirely driven by misunderstanding. Marco Polo sees no reason why the Doctor shouldn't be able to build a new TARDIS in Venice, but of course, he can't. To be fair, even if the Doctor was on Gallifrey, I don't think he could build a new TARDIS, so I don't see why he acts like the problem is where they are, rather than, well, his lack of ability. Marco is especially desperate because Kublai Khan is dying of old age, and since he isn't very popular at the court, he doesn't believe that whoever takes his place afterwards will let him go home. At this point, Barbara makes a minor slip-up, clearly a bit frustrated by this whole situation.
But you do see Venice again, Marco, I know you do.
But Marco doesn't notice it, fortunately I guess. Marco is determined to give Kublai Khan the TARDIS and refuses to hear any more arguments. At which point we get probably my favourite part of the episode, which is the part where the Doctor breaks down into laughter.
Make fun of it.
Grandfather!
It's go by sea, he says.
Why are you laughing? He means it.
Doctor, he's serious.
I know he is, yes.
What are you going to do?
Oh, I haven't the faintest idea.
The episode then ends with Tegana secretly meeting with this other guy. The man gives Tegana a vial of poison. Tegana then says their whole evil plan, which I'd think this guy already knows, but whatever. Anyway, the next day, Marco Polo is traveling through the Gobi Desert. His plan is to poison most of their water, but not all of it. Then, after a few days, return with the people who are plotting against Marco Polo, who will be traveling behind them. Then the group of conspirators will head back to Lop to rest for a while. Then they'll return to the Gobi Desert to retrieve the TARDIS after the group has died of thirst, which they'll then take to their warlord in order to overthrow Kublai Khan. The episode then ends there. I'm going to be incredibly brief with every following episode, because first of all there's 6 of them, and second of all, they're all pretty simple for the most part, other than maybe the last one. The plot of each of these is basically everyone trying to work against Marco, Dagana working against him by trying to get them all killed so he can take the TARDIS to the guy he works for. Meanwhile, the Doctor and his companions are also obviously working against Marco's interests, trying to get into the TARDIS so they can repair it and leave before he can get back to Kublai Khan. Fortunately for them, Marco is pretty compassionate and also probably needs them to explain how the TARDIS works, so he has no interest in killing any of them. Anyway, the next episode begins, and this episode is actually quite noteworthy. Not for anything relating to this story specifically, but more for Doctor Who as a whole, because this is what I'd classify as the first Doctor Light story. The Doctor himself barely appears in this story. We hear other characters talk about him, we see Susan go to his room with a plate full of food, then come back with the same plate untouched, explaining that the Doctor didn't want to eat any of it, but other than that we don't see him.
Grandfather being rude and sulking by himself? Oh, I don't think he's sulking, is he? Well, he won't eat. He won't even talk to me.
This story focuses much more on Ian's efforts to negotiate with Marco, which can kind of be said for the whole story actually. Ian is much more of a protagonist here than the Doctor is. He's also much better at being friendly with Marco, as we see him playing chess with him. As they're playing chess, we also see Dagana being very eerie and obviously evil.
And each commander determined to be the one who cries, Shamat.
Shamat?
Means the king is dead. Check. Marco, can you save your king?
I think so, Dagana.
It really feels like they're going for an L versus Light, two masterminds colliding kind of thing. And to their credit, Dagana is a more competent antagonist than most of the antagonists in this period of Doctor Who, but it still doesn't really work. He's still pretty unsubtle in terms of being villainous in my opinion. Anyway, that night he sneaks off, and Pink Cho and Susan follow him. However, while they're all out, a sandstorm comes.
Pink Cho, come on! Yeah, we must just get here! No!
Now admittedly, I've never been in a sandstorm before, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they're meant to sound like laughing gremlins. Back in the tent, Marco's giving some examples of how a sandstorm can sound different at different points in time. For weird reasons, I don't know, I don't think any of this is scientifically accurate. However, he brings up this option.
It can also be like a familiar voice calling your name. The travelers of the Gobi Desert have good reason to fear the singing sand farmer.
You get the point. Anyway, Marco just gave that example as setup for the next scene, which is possibly the most horrifying thing I've ever seen on Doctor Who. I refuse to believe that not a single child got scarred for life by this. Fortunately, Dagana finds the two and escorts them back. Apparently he doesn't want them killed yet, which is interesting. I guess this helps him buy Marco's trust, and he doesn't really care about this group, he cares more about Marco, so I guess it makes sense. When the girls get back, Barbara and Ian are of course very frustrated, since they found out that she'd left. The Doctor never found out though, since he's asleep. Again, he has very little screen time in this episode. When they return to their tents, Susan confides to Pink Cho that she doesn't believe that Dagana was actually just out for a walk, like he said to Marco. She believes that he was out for a reason. Unsurprisingly, she is right. He was actually out to go and poison the water, but he failed, so he has to go out again and do it. Regardless though, this leads to Susan already suspecting that Dagana isn't actually going to Kublai Khan to negotiate peace. Cutting back to Dagana, we see him go up to the water gourds he was planning to poison, and then he just empties them? I feel like I missed something, but I'm really certain I didn't. All I really have to go off of are the still images in the captions. But one scene, we see him leaving his tent with the vial of poison. The next, he's back with Marco. They then have some banter, then he leaves again, then he distracts a guard, and then he goes up to the water gourds, and then he starts pouring them out. But he still has the poison, I'm pretty sure. Regardless, this accomplishes pretty much the same thing. Marco suspects that bandits did this, for pretty much the same reason that Dagana's doing it, so he doesn't suspect Dagana yet. This also means though, that he thinks if they went back to Lop, they'd be attacked, so he says that they should go north to go to an oasis to refill on water. Dagana wants to go back, obviously because he wants to regroup with his conspirators. Marco doesn't allow this though, forcing him to stay with the caravan. We then cut to several days later. We are 22 minutes into this episode, and we finally get the Doctor on screen for the first time. He complains about the lack of water as Marco finally runs out. A part of me wonders why Marco doesn't just let the Doctor fix the TARDIS and then go in with him. That way the Doctor wouldn't be able to just fly off, and he could use the TARDIS to help them get water, or just move the entire caravan further. Tegana proposes that he go ahead further to get to the oasis first and then bring back water for the rest of them. Since Tegana's horse is still the strongest, Marco agrees to this. Then, 24 minutes into the episode, 2 minutes after appearing, and after only one line, the Doctor collapses from exhaustion. Marco allows the Doctor and Susan to return to the TARDIS as long as the other two stay with him, since the Doctor needs to rest. We then cut to Tegana, who arrogantly picks some water up from the oasis and then pours it onto the ground.
Here's water, Marco Polo! Come for it!
At the beginning of the next episode, the group pretty much completely gives up on making progress, putting all of their trust in Tegana to return. Thankfully for them though, the Doctor then makes a discovery. As it turns out, due to condensation, the walls of the TARDIS were completely wet with water, so the Doctor and Susan return with plenty of water. I don't think I have to explain that this of course would make no sense with how the modern TARDIS works. It's basically a different dimension, it doesn't really make sense for it to form condensation on the walls. It shouldn't really respond to the outside world at all, other than maybe when the doors are open. Anyway, we then get a funny scene where the group has to frantically explain to an angry Marco Polo how condensation works.
Condensation, do you understand?
No, I do not understand!
Just remember, last night it was cold. Bitterly cold, Marco. The outside of the caravan cold, but the inside stayed warm, and so moisture formed on the inside.
I have seen this happen.
They make it to the oasis, where Tegana explains that there were bandits there last night, so we had to wait in hiding until the morning. At this point, the Doctor, Ian and Barbara also suspect Tegana. Barbara points out that there was no remnants of a fire around, but it was very cold last night, so if bandits were around, surely they would have lit a fire or something. Anyway, they carry on across the Gobi Desert, with the Doctor still whining.
And you still don't seem to realize that you're speaking to a man of superior intellect.
I can certainly see why Ian's doing most of the negotiating this story. The Doctor's just kind of incapable of it because he's so arrogant. Anyway, they finally make it to their next stop, Tun Huang. I have no idea if that's the right pronunciation, but that's what Marco Polo uses.
Have you heard of the Cave of 500 Eyes?
No, I haven't. I do not know that one either, Miss Marco. I'm intrigued by this cave, Marco. Why is it called 500 Eyes?
On the walls are painted the faces of 250 evil men who once lived there. They were the Hashashins.
Hashashins?
Yes, and they were so called because they used the drug hashish.
I'm so tired, man. Anyway though, I do find this part kind of interesting, because this is a part of history I'm kind of curious about, but don't know much about. Unfortunately though, the Hashashins, that's probably not how you pronounce it, but whatever.
Hashashin.
The Hashashins aren't really that well used in this episode. I mean, they hardly come up. Anyway, during their stay here, the Doctor makes a lot of progress on the TARDIS as he sneaks in from time to time to repair it. As it turns out, the key he gave Marco Polo earlier to ensure he doesn't sneak in was actually a forgery he made. How? I don't know. I guess he just has the materials to do that in the TARDIS, somewhere. This has, however, put him in a much better mood this episode, as he is excited to hear Pink Show tell the group more about the Hashashins, something he doesn't seem to know much about.
Oh, now let me think, yes, there was some kind of scent found.
Well, Pink Joe knows the story and she's going to tell us about it.
Oh, how delightful, yes, why not?
With any other Doctor I'd find this strange, but with this Doctor I actually find it kind of weird how much human knowledge he does have, considering he claims to hate humans, or at least look down on them. Anyway, Pink Show takes a few minutes to tell the story. It's not bad by any means, but it also has no relevance to the plot, so I'm going to skip over it. All you really have to know is that there used to be a group of Hashashins in the area. Most of them were killed though, and those who survived allegedly made their base in the Cave of 500 Eyes, which we then see Tegana in as he meets with one of them. We also find out that the guy he got the poison from was also a Hashashin. I'm just going to call them assassin, okay? They're assassins. The assassins are a bit mad at Tegana because he was meant to meet with one of their couriers on the third night, but because of the sandstorm he couldn't. So that's why he was going for that walk. But that's a bit weird because I thought he would only meet with their couriers after he'd already poisoned the water, but by that point he hadn't poisoned the water yet. I mean, he didn't push in the water at all at the end, he just poured some of it out. We also find out that No Guy, who Tagana is working for, is sending an army to Karakorum, which was the old capital of the Mongols. Kublai Khan's court isn't there anymore, of course, but he still plans on forming his attack from there. One of the assassins reports that Tagana was followed there, at which point they capture Barbara, although she doesn't see Tagana, so she doesn't know that he's working with them. As Barbara doesn't return, Marco is a bit mad.
What kind of country do you come from where a woman can wander alone through the streets at night?
Why does he say it like that would be a bad thing? Anyway, Marco, Tagana, and Ian split up to search the city for her. Meanwhile, the Doctor stays behind. Fortunately for them, the assassins are taking their time, playing dice to see who gets the honor of killing this one random woman. As he is left alone, the Doctor decides to take some time to repair the TARDIS. However, he is spotted, both by this one random guy, Chen Chu, as well as by Ping Cho, who Susan takes with her to see the Doctor.
Don't worry about Ping Cho. You can trust her.
Yes, it's so I must, doesn't it? What is it?
Again, the Doctor seems very merciful with Ping Cho. I don't know, maybe it is just the grandfatherly connection. Anyway, the girls tell him that Barbara was curious about the Cave of 500 Eyes, so they all decide to go there to look for her. Chen Chu then tells Tagana that the Doctor went to the Cave of 500 Eyes. The episode ends as they search for her there, finding evidence that she was there at some point, although the Doctor seems more interested in the architecture.
That face is carved so that at the eyes the corpse is exposed. Now, isn't that interesting?
Grandfather, we're supposed to be looking for Barbara.
Barbara? Oh, yes, of course.
As the next episode begins, named The Wall of Lies, which thankfully I doubt any character is going to say that at any point because that would just sound weird. Susan swears she saw some eyes move, but the Doctor doesn't really believe her. At that point, Tagana arrives, trying to get them to leave. Marco and Ian also arrive soon after.
It is not wise to remain in these caves. They are possessed with evil spirits.
I'm not afraid of ghosts.
Oh, yes, I forgot. You're a magician, aren't you?
I like how much that title amuses him. Obviously, the real reason Tagana is acting like this is to try and scare them all off, but still, it's funny how little the others take him seriously.
Do not strike them down, great spirits of Hashashin. The warlord Tagana entreats you.
Is it safe for us to look now?
Do as you will.
Ian investigates the same wall painting as Susan and also sees the eyes move. They find the doorway in just in time to stop Barbara from being killed by the one Mongol who's still there. Before there were others, but I guess since he was the one who won the dice game, the others just left. Oh well, anyway, they've rescued her. Back at the town, Tagana further tries to convince Marco not to trust the group. He tells him that Chen Chu saw the Doctor try and enter the TARDIS.
But does a magician need a key to open a door?
At this point, Marco asks Barbara why she went to the cave, and Barbara says that she was following Tagana, which he denies. At the moment, Marco trusts Tagana more, so he decides to separate Susan and Ping Cho from now on. We then skip ahead several more days, where the Doctor says that progress has been slow due to Marco's increased suspicion. Regardless, he still thinks it'll only take another evening or two. The group is obviously quite pleased. At this point, they're quite sick of Marco, but Barbara feels a bit bad for Susan, who's grown attached to Ping Cho.
It's a pity there was any association at all. The Chinese child makes me nervous.
Whoa, Doctor. Unnecessary. Anyway, it turns out he's more so nervous about her because she knows about the key, since she and Susan caught him trying to enter the TARDIS. But still, there's no reason to bring her ethnicity into this. Anyway, at the same time, Susan sneaks up to talk to Ping Cho. They discuss how Ping Cho has been really enjoying their time together, and how she's sad that Susan will have to leave soon. Tagana conveniently starts eavesdropping on them as they talk about this.
This'll cheer you up. What? I'd forgotten you knew anything about the key.
Why would that cheer her up? That doesn't make any sense. Anyway, several more days pass, and then in Sinju, Tagana once again meets with one of the assassins, at which point they plan out a much more simple assassination. Tagana will silence the guards one night while they are in the bamboo forest, and then he'll signal him for him and his men to come in and slaughter the rest of the caravan. Much more simple than their previous plans. That night, Tagana also spots the Doctor entering his TARDIS. However, Barbara spots Tagana spotting the Doctor. Knowing that Tagana will likely go and warn Marco, Ian goes to talk with Marco first, to try and play a bluff. I don't know quite what the bluff was, but it backfired completely, as the Doctor exits the TARDIS as they're all watching, proving Tagana right. Marco then formally seizes the ship in the name of Kublai Khan. Before this was informal, but now that it's a formal decree, any resistance to it will be met with execution.
You poor, pathetic, stupid savage. Take them away!
Again, I can see why Ian's the negotiator. From this point on, the group is kept separately in a prison tent, guarded by one guy? Okay then. Regardless, they aren't happy with the situation. The TARDIS is fixed, but they need to get to it for that to matter. They decide to go and capture Marco. Ian will cut his way out of the tent with this broken piece of plate, and then the rest of them will go and ambush Marco together. At this point, their attitude towards him is very clearly hostile.
I think by the time I finish with that gentleman, he'll only be too glad to let us go.
Ian successfully sneaks up on the guard, but then finds out that he's already dead. The episode ends there. At the beginning of the next episode, we see just how unguarded they were, as Ian goes to Marco's tent immediately after this to warn him. Marco's tent is also unguarded though, so he kinda sneaks in quite easily. The two then go and warn Tagana, which stops him from lighting the torch that would signal the assassins to attack. Tagana then runs off and then brings back swords for them all to defend themselves. The Doctor, of course, is not known for using a sword, and certainly not for killing with one, but he doesn't seem to have any apprehensions here.
Pardon me. If you're half as aggressive with this as you are with your tongue, Doctor, we can't lose.
The Doctor brings up that they could just go into his caravan, aka the TARDIS, and hide in there, or even run off in it. But Marco still doesn't fully trust them. The group is fairly certain they'll lose if they rely purely on might, which makes me wonder why Tagana doesn't just backstab them now. They clearly don't have much of a numerical advantage. If he just betrayed them right now, he'd probably succeed. Regardless, Ian comes up with a pretty decent plan using his scientific knowledge. They'll use the bamboo and fire. By putting the bamboo over the fire, it will heat up and the air inside it will expand, eventually releasing a harsh noise that will scare off the assassins. This won't harm them, of course, but it will damage their morale. At the same time as Ian's coming up with his smart plan, the assassins decide to do the opposite, going directly against Tagana's advice of using stealth.
We'll make sport of it.
To my utter shock, this doesn't go well for them. They charge, Tagana is forced to fight against them in order to keep up his charade, he kills their leader, and then the bamboo starts to explode, scaring off what remains of them. It's worth noting that only the men fight here, which isn't that sexist, but I will say that I think Barbara would probably put up more of a fight than the Doctor. Anyway, this whole experience has obviously made Marco trust the group more, but it's also caused him to be a bit more wary, as the group did admit they were trying to escape.
Will you promise, on your honor, not to attempt another escape? So be it.
Still though, as thanks to them for saving his life, he does restore a lot of their previous freedoms. He also revokes the official seizure of the TARDIS, meaning they're not at threat of death anymore. Marco and Tagana then leave. Then the group discusses Tagana a bit more, trying to figure out what his plan is. Then this guy arrives alongside Pinchot. Ian points out that he seems like he came from far away, to which the writer replies that he travelled all the way from the Summer Palace at Sheng-Tu. This leads into a short educational segment on how Mongolian riders could travel so far to deliver messages. Nothing at all plot relevant, but it's worth noting that these historical episodes do try and be a bit historical in terms of educating children. The messenger delivers an order from Kublai Khan to travel to him immediately. This means that they have to rush to the next city over, and it also means that TARDIS will have to travel behind them, making it a bit more vulnerable. This story is already quite long, obviously as 7 parts, but it's quite insane how canonically long it is. This next trip takes 6 days for them, and I don't think any of their previous trips have been that short either. Canonically, they've been traveling for a month or 2. Considering most of their adventures are only a day or 2, this is canonically what Ian and Barbara spend most of their time with the Doctor doing. Anyway, they arrive at Sheng-Ting. From here, they plan to ride on horseback to Sheng-Tu, with the TARDIS going in a trade caravan behind them. Here they also meet this guy, who I think is doing a racist accent.
To what does the old lord refer?
His caravan.
Oh, that's what it is. I had it moved.
I don't know, I can't tell if it's a racist Chinese impression or a Guy Incognito impression.
Who's Homer? My name is Guy Incognito.
The stables, my lord.
Steak.
Well, I could hardly leave it in the hanging garden, my lord, now could I?
I could hardly have it placed in the hanging garden, now could I? What does he think it is, a potting shed or something?
While they're here, Pinchot sees where Marco hid the TARDIS key. He asks her to promise not to tell anyone, and she makes that promise. However, she does give the key to Susan later on.
But you promised promised Master Marco not to tell anyone. I haven't. You don't know where I got it?
That's a very dumb technicality, but whatever. That night, they all try and sneak up to get into the TARDIS. Ian ambushes this one guard by coming up to him pretending to be drunk, which I'm kind of surprised they were allowed to do on the kids show, to be honest. Anyway, it works, and when he's close enough, he ambushes him. They all make it except for Susan, who went back to say bye to Pink Cho first, and on her way back got caught by Tagana. I haven't discussed Susan and Pink Cho's relationship that much in this story. I'll discuss it more in part 3, but for now I'll just say this doesn't come out of nowhere. Using her as leverage, the other three are forced out of the TARDIS as well. Marco's frustrated of course, but since they're a day away from Kublai Khan's court, he decides not to do anything about it. It's also worth noting that Ian takes the blame for finding the keys, so Pink Cho is safe. At an inn on their next stop, Barbara forces Ian to confront Marco again.
You must talk to Marco.
Talk to Marco? I've done nothing else but talk to Marco.
Oh, Marco. Ian wants a word with you.
Oh.
I'm feeling a bit tired, so I think I'll go off to bed.
Just a minute. Barbara, come here. Well?
Ian does something honestly quite remarkable for the show and tells Marco the whole truth.
As I told you, I come from England. Barbara...
Well, I grant you England's a long way, but the journey's not impossible, Ian. The Crusaders did it.
Our caravan, it can cross time.
Travel into the past and the future?
Yes.
They told me that in Cathay there was a stone which burned. I did not believe them, but there is such a stone. I have seen it. And if a stone burns, why not a caravan that flies? You are asking me to believe that your caravan can defy the passage of the sun?
This obviously doesn't work, especially when Marco points out that Ian's already lied to him many times, such as when Ian claimed that he found the key, when obviously he doesn't know where he found it, because Pink Cho did. Marco does say though that he would give Ian the key if he believed him, which makes me wonder why Ian doesn't try harder to convince him. Barbara has already displayed a weird amount of knowledge about Marco's history, so I feel like it should be kind of easy to convince him. The next day, they find out that Pink Cho has gone missing. Ian is given permission to go back to the last stop, as they believe that she most likely stayed there, as she is trying to get to Samarkand, her home.
He'll bring her back. You mustn't underestimate him.
Very good advice, Marco.
By basically sheer coincidence, Pink Cho, and now Ian, who has also returned to the previous way station looking for her, discover that the thief paid by Tagana took the TARDIS away from where it was meant to be delivered. Tagana then also gets permission to go back to retrieve all of them, after convincing Marco that Ian might be planning something, using the fact that none of them approve of the marriage between Pink Cho and her fiancé as evidence.
Yes, I am completely opposed to it.
Meanwhile, Ian and Pink Cho correctly decide that the TARDIS is likely being taken to Karakorum, as it is an old road that isn't used much anymore since the capital moved. The rest of the group is actually at the capital now, awaiting Kublai Khan's audience. Here the Doctor comments on how all the architecture is Chinese rather than Mongolian, and Marco gives a brief summary of some of the Khan's passions.
Do you know in his stables he has 10,000 white stallions?
Yes, well, one's enough for me, young man. Red, white, or blue.
At this point, they've run into possibly the most danger they've been in this story, as the Doctor's aging back prevents him from kowtowing properly.
Not to pay him homage will cost you your head.
Well, if it breaks my back, then he can take all of me. So why waste time on small items?
Very fortunately for them, the Khan is actually very quick to like the Doctor, as he can relate to his ailing back. He even agrees to let the Doctor carry on to their next destination in his carriage.
Oh, what a trial old age is.
It must be borne with dignity, sir.
Dignity? Yes, of course. Now, take my arm, friend.
It's worth noting here, obviously Kublai Khan is depicted as a bit old and kind of goofy, but I still say the story treats him mostly respectfully.
That's the mighty Kublai Khan.
Laugh if you will, but he is the greatest administrator the world has ever seen.
I'm sorry, Mr. Marco.
While they're here though, they also learn that Nogai's armies are in Karakorum. However, Tagana isn't here to negotiate peace, as of course he went back to look for Ian and Pink Cho. The episode ends as Ian and Pink Cho ambush the thief, holding a dagger to his throat and forcing him to tell them who he stole the TARDIS for. As he says that he stole it for Tagana, Tagana shows up. Oh, by the way, if you're wondering why I didn't use the Peter Griffin clip this episode, this episode is called Mighty Kublai Khan. It would have gone boring by the 20th time I had to do it, so oh well. Anyway, we're finally reaching the final episode, and you can see why I felt like shortening this one compared to the Dalek story, right? I mean, I feel like most of the episodes are kind of the same thing when you summarize them enough. That isn't to say it's poorly written though, it's a bit contrived in some places, but still, overall I'd say this is one of the best stories so far, in terms of writing. As the next episode begins, both Ian and Tegana are disarmed by the Captain Courier of Kublai Khan, who is there to deliver them both to him. Meanwhile, the Doctor is absolutely destroying Kublai Khan at backgammon, much to his wife's displeasure.
What do we owe?
35 elephants with ceremonial bridles, trappings, brocades and pavilions, 4,000 white stallions and 25 tigers.
That's not too bad so far.
And the sacred tooth of Buddha, which Polo brought home from India.
Oh, that. Oh, what ails? What more?
Well, I'm very much afraid all the commerce from Burma.
Oh?
1 year, sire.
You're not wagering, are you? You know how it affects your gout.
The Doctor convinces the Khan to play one final game. If the Doctor loses, Kublai Khan can get back everything he bet previously. If the Doctor wins, he can get his TARDIS back. The Khan doesn't really want to do this, as it's a gift from Marco and he hasn't even seen it yet.
No, not that. No, take something else. The island of Sumatra.
But, to Marco's displeasure, the Khan does eventually agree to it.
My old fox. The Khan hasn't even seen it yet and he's taking it away from him.
So we'll all have what we wanted.
Yes, all except Pincher.
Yes, I'm afraid there's nothing we can do about her, Susan.
They are then told that Ian and Pincher have been arrested, as apparently the guards believe Tegana over them. They also find out that the Doctor lost the game, getting a simple piece of paper money as a consolation prize, which, to be fair, would actually be quite valuable now. The Doctor isn't mad though, he seems to like the Khan as well. Anyway, Ian tells Marco that Tegana's definitely plotting against the Khan, but Marco still doesn't fully believe him, as there's not enough evidence. At the same time, Tegana, who's credited with recovering the TARDIS, tries to convince the Khan that Marco is plotting against him, and that the Doctor was trying to recover the TARDIS the whole time they were adventuring. This is shockingly the first time that Marco and the group both being Europeans is brought up. Tegana has never mentioned it before, but now that he's with the Khan, he's trying to convince the Khan that Marco will side with them, as they are all Europeans. This is of course assuming the Doctor and Susan are Europeans, and that Europeans are known for getting along well with other Europeans, but obviously the Khan wouldn't know how wrong all that is. The Khan confronts Marco about this as he enters, at which point Marco admits that he had actually been lenient on the group as he felt bad for taking the TARDIS, as he wasn't doing it for just reasons, he was doing it for selfish reasons.
What did you hope to gain?
He wanted to force you to let him return to Venice.
You wanted to bribe us, Marco?
I'd hoped you would allow me to return home, my lord.
Your gift has failed. It is ours because we won the right to keep it in the game of chance. Where's the key?
In my quarters, my lord.
Bring it to us after the banquet, and then we'll examine our prize.
At this point, Marco's plans have all basically failed, and I'd say he's written sympathetically enough for the audience to feel bad for him at this point. This is followed by very good news, for Ping Cho at least, as it turns out her husband-to-be died at the banquet. She does, however, choose to stay at Kublai Khan's court rather than return home. At this point, the Khan is finally about to meet with Tegana. He'll then have the TARDIS opened after that. As Marco exits the room, he bumps into Tegana. At this point, Marco has finally figured out that Tegana is definitely the one who's been plotting against him this whole time.
I underestimated you, Tegana. You overestimated yourself.
Meanwhile, the main group determines what should have probably been quite obvious by now, which is that Tegana's definitely going to assassinate the Khan. They escape with Ian, shockingly easily might I add. Again, there was only one guard guarding this guy. This is kind of a problem with a lot of old Doctor Who. You'll see what is in my opinion the worst case of this in the next story actually. There are so many cases of the antagonist just having way too few guards, considering the situation. Regardless, they bump into Marco and warn him. Again, Marco already suspected Tegana, but I guess he just didn't realize that Tegana was going to assassinate him. We then cut back to Tegana and the Khan, and speaking of a lack of guards, it turns out there aren't really many here either. Tegana launches himself at the Khan, but kills the Vizier instead, and then Marco comes in, and then there's this big duel between the two of them. as if the Khan didn't have any other guards that could help him. I mean, at this point, Tagana's like right next to the Khan, why doesn't he just kill him? Instead though, he turns to fight Marco, who's on the other end of the room. And again, this is a big palace, so it's not like Marco could run and stop him. Regardless, we then get a big dramatic fight scene. Or at least what I assume to be one, but again, may I remind you, this is all just a slideshow, so it's kind of hard to tell. Marco successfully disarms Tagana, at which point the guards finally get involved, thank you, and then Tagana chooses to kill himself, rather than face execution. The next events happen very fast, so it's kind of hard to tell what's happening with all of these slideshow images. Having realized that Tagana was the threat the whole time, Marco quickly gives the Doctor his keys and tells him to run. They then quickly run into the TARDIS and escape. Susan does say bye to Pink Cho before they leave, and the rest of the group does thank Marco, but that's pretty much all the dialogue that happens.
I am sorry, my lord. I had to give them back their flying caravan.
If you hadn't, the old man would have wanted that backgammon. And it is true. A flying caravan.
I find it strange that they act like the TARDIS flew away, when it clearly dematerialized, which, if anything, should be far more exciting. Regardless, we then get a sweet moment of Kublai Khan implying that Marco will one day return to Venice.
There's something for you to tell your friends in Venice.
No, my lord. They would not believe half the things that I have seen in Cathay. But what is the truth? I wonder where they are now. The past or the future?
Wait, there is also an epilogue. Nothing really happens though, we just learn that Marco returned to Venice 3 years after the events of the story, so good for him. Having rewatched the story again, I really do like it in many ways. Compared to the previous two stories, this story has easily the best side characters so far. I find Marco really entertaining, I really like Tagana. He could have gone with being a bit more subtle, but he's still probably the smartest villain we've had so far. Not that that's a high bar, I mean our previous villains were a caveman and the Daleks, but still he was pretty smart. The Khan was also quite entertaining for what little screen time he had. Then there's also Pink Cho, who I think gave Susan a lot more to do in this story than basically any other story. It wasn't really plot relevant, so I didn't discuss it that much, but this is a lot more screen time than Susan usually gets, and her relationship with Pink Cho is sweet.
And your home, Susan? You've never told me about that.
It's as far away as a night star.
But you can reach it from Venice, can't you?
No, Pink Cho. No, I can't.
I gave him my word, Susan. I promised not to tell anyone where he put the key. And I promise you that no one will ask you.
I didn't really want to go into it earlier, but this is why Susan was so desperate to go back to say bye to Pink Cho, because she'd promised to.
Pink Cho!
What can I say?
Really, the side characters are kind of what makes the story work for me. I mean, again, especially Marco Polo, I find him quite easy to understand for most of it, and while of course I want the group to succeed, I also feel bad for him.
I wish I could explain to you how important the TARDIS is to us.
And I wish I could explain to you, Ian, how important it is to me.
There are a couple of other things I don't think I gave the story enough credit for in part 1, so I'll briefly mention them here. First of all, the story has a lot of foreshadowing. It's not particularly subtle, but I do enjoy it. It is a bit subtle sometimes.
It wasn't a doubt in the fire. Their leader is killed. That's why they broke up and ran.
But what you have to take into account where battles are concerned, dear boy, are its leaders. Kill the leader and where are you? What happens? The whole army dissipates itself into chaos and utter confusion. It happens throughout your history time and time again.
The final positive I have to say is I think this episode is probably the best educational episode in all of Doctor Who. It conveys a lot of information without spoon-feeding the audience. It does that a couple times, I guess. There's the part with the Hashashish or the assassins. Pink Cho tells a story about them, and then Ian also explains to Susan some more information about them, which probably should have been Barbara, but whatever. Regardless though, this does make enough sense, because of course Susan is a student, and Ian and Barbara are teachers. There are, however, much more subtle instances, like for example when Barbara accidentally says China, when back then it used to be called Cathay.
China? I do not know this place. Chengdu is in Cathay.
Silly of me.
But probably my favourite instance of this is in the scene between Tagana and the thief he's paying to steal the TARDIS.
We want gold, not Kublai Khan's paper money.
This dialogue makes perfect sense for these characters to have, and also easily conveys that Kublai Khan established a form of currency that was using paper. It's genuinely quite impressive to me how well the writers convey that information without spoon-feeding it. I mean, I didn't know that. It's cool. Really, I don't have much bad to say. It's a bit contrived at points, and I think the group could probably try a bit harder to persuade Marco, especially when Ian admits they're time travelers. I feel like from that point on they could just admit everything to him, and they'll probably eventually convince him. Regardless though, overall this is a very good story, which is unfortunately very hard to fully enjoy, because all that's left of it is basically a slideshow. Fortunately we still have all the audio, but again, it's not really the highest quality, is it? If you can tolerate that though, I definitely think I'd recommend this story overall. It's quite entertaining, and I'll argue it's the best entirely historical episode, period. That's of course not including all the ones that mix historical and sci-fi, but of all the purely historical episodes, I'd say this is probably the best one. Anyway, that's pretty much all I have to say about this story, so let's get into the last story for this video. If I was to recommend this story for any reason really, it would be for the novelty of it. It really stands out, with a plotline that has more akin to fantasy than sci-fi. The group is stuck on this planet as their TARDIS is taken away by this man, who employs them to go and find these keys, which he needs to use to repair this machine, which is effectively an AI mind control device, which controls everyone on the planet and stops them from doing evil things. However, it's been broken for a while, and the world has descended back into chaos. The group therefore has to teleport to various locations on the planet to recover the keys, which are being held by different groups. These are all dangerous locations though, and everyone who has previously been sent on this mission has failed. Something very interesting, both about this planet and this plotline as a whole, is how diverse it is. Because this planet is populated by a variety of life forms that have all formed different societies, each episode feels like they're in a completely different setting. It's not like most sci-fi planets where it's like, oh, that's the sand planet, or oh, that's the snow planet, looking at you Star Wars. Each location they travel to feels like it could be on a completely different planet in a completely different story. This makes the story very interesting. If anything, my only criticism of it is that it's a bit too diverse. It feels like all of these different societies coexisting on this planet is a bit unusual, especially considering its history, considering the planet used to be under the control of a device that stopped people from being evil entirely, or at least doing evil things. This story is yet another 7-parter, making it again quite long and hard to recommend, but it is also, for the reasons I've already said, probably the most unique story of this era. I'll give a brief summary of each of the locations now, just, so there's a spoiler-free version of it. The first location they go to is a place that seems like a luxurious palace, until Barbara finds out a lot of the luxuries seem to be illusions, simply there to keep them occupied. The next area is a jungle with hostile plants. Look, they're not all going to be complicated. The next is a snowy cliff face, which again is quite simple, but is complicated by the fact that they bump into this guy. The next location is a city, where people are presumed guilty until proven innocent. The only other location is the place where the machine is held, where the TARDIS lands initially. In addition to the guy who captured the Doctor in his group, there's also this villain who wants the machine for his own personal use, to try and control the world. I didn't bring him up previously because honestly, he isn't that important to the plot, which I think is my biggest criticism of the story. There is a main antagonist, but he only appears briefly in the first episode, and in the last episode to try and get the keys from the group when they return. This guy has a lot of henchmen working for him, so I think the story would have worked much better if he had henchmen in each area also trying to get the keys first. Then there'd be more conflict. But instead, all of the antagonists have basically nothing to do with the main overall plot. There's these brains in jars who want to control the group, there's the plants I guess, there's this guy who I'll get into more later, but he's just kind of a creep. There's also whoever stole this key before Ian could get to it, but even he's not working for the main antagonist, he just wants to sell it. I'll now talk about spoilers with this story, but overall, all I have to say about it is, while it is very unique, and I did enjoy it personally, I'm not sure I'd really recommend it. If you're watching other old Doctor Who stories, you should probably at least check out the first episode or two, because it is very unique, but overall, it can be a bit boring at times, especially in the middle parts, due to the fact that the main antagonist barely has a hand in them. There's also the problem that the minor antagonists aren't really that good, but I'll get more into that in the spoiler part of this video. Something very interesting about this episode is it's the first one that doesn't lead directly from the last episode. I mean, I'm sure canonically this is happening right after the last one, but from what we can see, the last one doesn't show the beginning of this one. Anyway, we can also see that they're still using models, and while this one's less impressive than the Dalek City, the TARDIS shows up, which is adorable. I need this. Inside the TARDIS, we get our main evidence that this is the adventure happening immediately after the last one, unless that's what Ian usually wears, but I don't think that's the case. Looks nice though. While they're in the TARDIS, we also learn that the first Doctor has a coloured TV.
Pity you don't have colour television.
Oh, but I have.
Which means that he's depriving us by forcing us to watch this in black and white. Anyway, moving on to the actual story, they've wound up on a beach island, although their excitement is slightly hampered by the fact that it turns out the water is all acid. They also discover these torpedo-looking things, which seemingly used to have people in them, indicating that they aren't alone. They plan to go back to the TARDIS to get Susan, who had to go back because she lost her shoes from the acid. But Susan's already gone to this large pyramid-like structure, where we get yet another use of matte paintings. This one probably even funnier than the Dalek City in my opinion. We also see this guy planning to stab her. We've seen him sneaking around a couple times this episode so far, and I have to wonder why he doesn't just stab her. I mean, he's twice her size, he's almost certainly stronger than her, but he's been stalking her this whole time and he's just going to kill her now? Fortunately for Susan though, that matte painting in the background isn't the only Looney Tunes thing about this building. As they approach the pyramid, we get some dialogue from Barbara about the architecture.
Look at the joins in the blocks, Ian.
No mortar.
Yes, the Egyptians did the same thing. So did the Indians of Central and Southern America.
In my Unearthly Child video, I claimed that Barbara's knowledge of history doesn't come up that often. This was before rewatching these episodes. I'm kind of starting to feel like an idiot now. Still though, I'm almost certain it becomes less relevant later. We'll see though. Anyway, the group is one by one Looney Tunes into the building. We're going to call specific attention to the Doctor though, because he doesn't even respond to it. Most of the other characters sound surprised, he just kind of accepts it. At this point, all of them but Ian are captured. Ian, I guess, just stepped in without being captured, so he's just wandering around. They figure out that the guys in the black scuba outfits are absolutely intruders as well, since they came in on submarines, and this monk-looking guy, who seems to own the place, is attacking them. Ian sees one of the scuba guys trying to kill the monk, and he intervenes and throws him against a wall, at which point we get my favourite death in all of Doctor Who history. Seeing that Ian and his companions are trustworthy, he releases them all and gives them a massive lore dump about this planet. He explains that the planet reached its technological peak over 2,000 years ago, culminating in the creation of this machine. It was called the Conscience of Marinus, and at first it was just an impartial judge and jury that existed to tell what was right and wrong. But eventually they developed a means for it to influence the minds of everyone on the planet.
They no longer had to decide what was wrong or right. The machine decided for them.
This peace lasted 7 centuries, until a man named Yatek found a way of overcoming the machine's influence. Him and his followers, the Vord, became immune to its effects, and being the only people capable of evil on the planet, they quickly started robbing and exploiting people. The keepers of the machine didn't want to destroy it, but instead they removed 5 core components, these key microchips, which temporarily disabled the machine. One of them was kept here, and the other 4 were distributed to safe places across the planet. Safe, I guess. Yeah, we'll get into that momentarily, but I feel like some of these places are a bit strange. I mean, some of them, sure, I can see how they're protected from enemies, but one of them especially is like, why would you trust these people with this? Then again, according to his timeline, it seems like over a millennia has happened since the keys were distributed, so maybe things have just changed. The machine is ready to be reused again, but he needs the keys back, and every single one of his followers that he sent, aka everyone but him, has failed, including his daughter that he sent last year. Over the years, this guy's lost all of his friends, all of his followers, even his own daughter, but finally, with the coming of these 4 people, he can finally recover the keys and restore hope to the planet of Marinus.
I felt terrible leaving that old man.
I wish there had been something we could have done for him.
I didn't cut anything out there. That's the scene that happens immediately after the old guy asked them for help. Yeah, as generally moral as Barbara and Ian are, this is a bridge too far for them. They're not going to sacrifice themselves on this mission that's clearly very dangerous for some guy they don't know who's not even in imminent danger. And as for the Doctor, well, that goes without saying, really. I mean, of course he's not going to help. However, as it turns out, they don't have a choice.
What is it?
Some sort of invisible barrier.
The man pretty much forces them to come back and go on this quest for him. He gives them these teleporter devices so they can move from place to place easily.
This little thing? Oh, don't be ridiculous, my boy. This is a perfectly acceptable method of travel. Very compact and very neat, sir, if I may say. Yes.
It's like, I've got a sports car, you've got a space hopper.
This is probably going to be the only instance of me comparing the first Doctor to a later Doctor and saying the first Doctor was kinder. The guy even had the nerve to compare it to the TARDIS and he didn't speak up.
The principle is much the same as that of your ship.
As they leave, the monk guy is stabbed, I think. At least I think that's what happened. And the episode ends with the other three going to the location of the first key, finding Barbara's teleporter on the ground with blood on it. Barbara left like 15 seconds before the others, by the way. It wasn't really worth noting. Obviously concerned by this, at the beginning of the next episode, they hurry through a set of doors nearby. This leads to these flashing lights happening and this weird sound. Afterwards though, they are in a beautiful, luxurious room, where they find Barbara, who seems fine. It turns out Barbara just cut herself in the panic as she was moving through space. So she's actually fine. This place is, well, luxury. There's even servants here to take care of them. They all almost immediately start enjoying themselves, although Ian still has a few apprehensions.
See, I don't know the price yet.
A man comes in and explains that in the city of Morphine, a city where every desire of the people is granted. To prove this to them, he offers to grant them any wish they desire overnight. Susan asks for a dress, and the doctor asks for an advanced lab. They then decide to go to bed for the night, which is fair I guess. They probably woke up this morning back in Cathay, so I can see why they'd be tired. As they're all going to bed, Barbara talks to Ian about the fact that he's still paranoid. He can't understand how rich you'd have to be to give away such luxuries for free.
You can't apply Earth standards, you just can't.
I actually really like that line. I like when they acknowledge that these are different cultures. Sometimes they can really just feel like humans in space, so I appreciate that. As they sleep, the eyes on this creepy image on the wall begin to glow, and this servant comes in and starts putting discs on each of their heads. Barbara's falls off and she wakes up, but she is then knocked out immediately by these weird lights again. The next morning, Barbara sleeps in much later than the other three. However, when Susan's dress arrives, they decide to wake her up, when we guess genuinely a pretty decent twist.
What's the matter?
Well, look.
Susan, get me a glass of that fruit juice, will you?
Yes.
Here, drink this.
No, it's filthy.
So for some reason, probably because that disc fell off her head last night, the illusions have worn off for her. A part of me wonders why they didn't realize that the disc fell off of her. I mean, they came to collect the disc from the other three that morning, so they definitely knew that she didn't sleep with it on. Anyway, the other three obviously think she's gone mad, as she's suddenly calling everything filthy. Altos then comes in, and with how the camera's positioned, you can kind of see what Ian meant yesterday by him being a bit creepier.
Aren't you feeling well? Let me take you to our physicians.
She runs away, but Altos insists to the others that they shouldn't worry about her and that he'll deal with it. Barbara runs into this room and hides behind a column. Yeah, in case it wasn't obvious by now, hiding in this universe is incredibly easy. Regardless, Altos makes the smart decision to lock the door behind him. He then reports to his superiors.
She has escaped into the city.
Who placed the discs?
The girl, Sabitha.
She has failed us and must be punished.
Easily the third best alien design in all of Doctor Who. Anyway, they give the orders to kill Barbara, as they can no longer control her. They also order him to punish the servant who failed, who was then sent to the same room Barbara's locked up in, conveniently. Well, I say conveniently, but she isn't of much help.
I believe you're under some deep form of deep hypnosis.
I'm to be punished.
Meanwhile, the main creepers inform that Barbara is alright, and get that lab they asked for, which is a bit less impressive than they were promised, but they seem happy. In the prison room, Barbara realizes that the girl that failed is wearing a necklace that has one of the keys on it. She then asks the girl if she remembers Arpatan, who is the man who sent them there. She remembers that he is her father. At the same time though, the main group is forgetting about her. By tomorrow, they'll be completely under the control of these weird little guys. Atlos comes in and finds Barbara, but before he can kill her, Sabitha snaps out of it and knocks him out, although she does go back in trance immediately after. As Barbara escapes, she bumps into Ian, but he doesn't remember her, and he takes her straight to the aliens. They unsurprisingly have an evil villain monologue prepared, where they explain how they use humans to feed them and also to make the city run, since they're only brains. Since she is beyond their control, they decide that they have to kill her, which they order Ian to do. Ian doesn't resist this at all actually. It seems like he's about to kill her, but at the last second she breaks free of his chokehold and does this.
Kill her!
Okay, so up until that point I would have classed this as a very good episode, but this completely ruins it for me. They have a complete city under their control, but they don't have a single bodyguard? They're completely aware of how powerless they are, and yet they had Barbara brought to them, and then had her killed in front of them, when they could have just had her killed earlier, like in another room. But instead, they bring her to the one room where she can kill them, and only has one guy there with them. Everyone who is under the brain's control immediately breaks free at this point, which unsurprisingly leads to the city getting burnt down. As that happens though, the group decides to form a plan. Altos and Sabitha are also joining them. As it turns out, Altos was also working for Arpatan. This leads into, in my opinion, the funniest part of the episode, so I'm going to explain this part in a bit of detail, just so you can understand how insane this is. Altos explained to the Doctor off-screen how he and his friend planned to split up. He would come to this city first, where of course he was brainwashed, and his friend would go to the city of Marinus, which is a civilized city, or at the very least that's the exact word he uses to describe it to the Doctor. The Doctor, upon hearing this, decides to adopt his plan and splits up the group. However, how he splits it up is very interesting. He decides that the group that should go ahead a few jumps and go to the city of Marinus, a city which, once again may I remind you, is described to him as highly civilized and mostly peaceful, will include the Doctor. That's it, it's just the Doctor. Meanwhile, everyone else, including his own granddaughter, will go to the Jungle of Death where there's a bunch of evil plants and stuff, and this barren cliff face that's covered in snow. Again, this isn't a coincidence. The Doctor has been told that Marinus is safe, and yet he decides only he should go.
The highly civilized society. Now then, I've decided to adopt his plan.
When Susan is confused about the fact that she's not going with him, the Doctor simply says that splitting up their forces will be the easiest way to get the keys faster. But this isn't an even split at all. What he's actually done in essence is give himself the easiest job while endangering everyone but himself. Regardless, they split up, and Susan is immediately terrified of the place she's ended up in. Nice going, Doctor.
Go away! Go away!
I'm going to go over the next episode very quickly, because really not that much happens. There's also no real antagonist or interesting side characters for this part, so it's a bit boring. Not boring enough that you should skip it if you're going to watch this full story, but boring enough that I don't really have much to say. Other than the fact that, as I basically already said with the last episode, this episode's going to be a Dr. Light episode, as will the one after it, as the Doctor is busy in Marinus. Anyway, the rest of the group arrived too late to hear the screaming. Susan arrived a bit early because she didn't want to say goodbye.
I don't like to say goodbye.
Oof. Anyway, Ian and the two newcomers decide to go off and explore, while Barbara and Susan decide to stay behind. Ian agrees, but tells them not to go and do anything until they return.
I think it's nice the way he looks after us all the time.
Yes, I know. But just once in a while.
You rebel.
I do love when old shows try and be progressive. I mean, they're pretty bad at it, but the attempt is sweet. As they're alone, Susan elaborates on what she heard. She claims that she'd heard it before, but can't remember where from, which is weird. We haven't had that many stories so far, and we know they haven't really faced off against evil plants yet, so clearly she's not remembering anything from the story we've seen. As they're talking, one of the plants comes down and grabs onto Susan's ankles, something which Barbara immediately tries to gaslight Susan into believing didn't happen.
Stop it! He was trying to twine around me.
I don't know why the characters in the show are so quick to dismiss each other. Anyway, Barbara decides to push her way through these plants and go down this archway. She gets to the end and finds this statue with a microchip key on it, and So yeah, exactly what you would expect to happen happens. Kind of creepy to grab down there, but whatever. Even worse, it turns out the microkey Barbara found was a fake. Something they only find out when Susan and Altos go on ahead, thinking that Barbara will just teleport to the next location after finding the microkey. There is now yet another split in the group, with Barbara and Ian being the only ones to stay here, while everyone else moves on to the next location. Ian runs after Barbara, and learns that at least the creepy hands don't discriminate. Ian quickly finds Barbara, but finds out that the area is completely booby-trapped, including this night statue, which is very comically Scooby-Doo-like.
Ian, behind you!
They both wander into separate traps, but are saved by this man, who seems to guard this place. However, he is then immediately strangled half to death by these plants, meaning he doesn't have long to live. He only has time to warn them about the whispering of the plants, and then say DE302. The two immediately assume it's the combination for a safe, and go into the next room, where they find a large safe, so I can see why they would assume that, but it doesn't work. They can't find anything else in the room, but Ian bumps into this mysterious journal, discussing how it is possible to accelerate the process of destruction of nature. I have no idea why they'd want to do this, but clearly they succeeded, as the plants start attacking them. For some reason, when darkness comes, the plants start getting hyperactive and growing at an increased rate. Why they start strangling people though? Look man, I don't have all the answers, they don't explain that. The two escape just in time, realizing that DE302 is just a fake chemical formula. They find the key in this glass, which is transparent by the way, and they did look around before, so I don't know how they didn't find it. Anyway, they move on to the next location, and the episode ends, as it is immediately too cold for them. It's so cold that they both pass out almost immediately as the next episode begins, though they're saved by this man who seems charming.
You afraid of me?
No.
Last year I broke the back of a wolf with my bare hands.
Look man, I get it. Not everyone can be good at small talk. The man claims he got help from Altos carrying them to the cabin, but then he immediately left again to go find the key. He refuses to help them go looking for them at the moment, as a storm is coming, and he doesn't think they'll make it back alive. However, he does give Ian supplies to go and find them himself, as a trade for the teleporter on his arm. The second Ian's gone, he goes back to being really creepy.
That door will keep anything out. Or in.
Despite the stock footage of wolves harassing him, Ian successfully finds Altos knocked out in the snow. He also finds out that his arms have been tied. Back at the cabin, Barbara finds a bunch of the teleportation devices alongside Sabitha's chain with the keys they found so far. The man claims to have traded food and water for them, but Barbara knows that he's lying, because there's no way she would give that away for any price. Barbara is unable to do anything on her own though, but threatens that when Ian gets back he'll deal with him. But the guy says that Ian probably won't get back. Altos explains to Ian that he forced the man to help him, and at the first chance he got, he ruthlessly attacked him. At this point, Ian looks at the bag that he brought with him, that the man gave him, and finds a bunch of raw meat in there. If this weren't a Doctor Who episode, it could easily pass for an episode of Looney Tunes at this point. Fortunately for Barbara, the man waits patiently for a while, certain that no one will come to help her. By the time he loses his patience, Ian arrives.
I meant them no harm, I swear it. I gave them food and flint to light a fire.
Treacherous! No, Altos!
You know, I'm really starting to think this guy was lying earlier when he was bragging.
Last year I broke the back of a wolf with my bare hands. I meant them no harm, I swear it.
The second he's at all outnumbered, he gives up. They force the man to lead them to the cave where Sabitha and Susan are staying, and then even force him further in, even though he's really panicking, because he believes there's demons in the cave. You also see that he wasn't a complete liar, because he did give Susan and Sabitha some fire. Going further in, they eventually find Susan and Sabitha on the other end of this rickety bridge. Unfortunately though, in their excitement, they forget that the other guy is still on the other side of the bridge. Now stranded, they have to go further into the cave to try and find building materials to create a new bridge. On their way, they find this room, with a large block of ice in the middle, guarded by these 4 knight statues. The key is in the block of ice, and there are pipes nearby to heat up the ice, so all they have to do is wait for it to melt, and in the meantime try and find building materials. They build a makeshift bridge out of stalagmites, or possibly stalactites? I don't know, we don't see where they get them from, so it could have come from the roof or the floor. Regardless, they've succeeded, and they go back to the room with the ice block, which has now melted. However, the knights are also mysteriously hunched over. When approached, they suddenly spring to life as well. This also reveals that they're definitely organic and not robotic, which makes me wonder what they were doing there the whole time. I mean, they clearly weren't frozen. Maybe they're just like those British royal guards where they're not allowed to move. Anyway, the group escapes them, killing this one in the process. They then hurry back to the man's hut to get their things back.
No!
Here, Sabitha!
I broke the back of a wolf with my bare hands.
The man is so scared he runs out of the cabin, but then runs back in when he sees the demons outside. He tries to take Susan hostage to force others to stay with him, but he is stabbed through the doorway, killing him. The others then escape. You know, these knights were almost certainly put here in order to guard this key, but they're clearly organic and clearly capable of emotion since they're quite confused, so why can't they just reason with them and say, hey, we're trying to rebuild the machine? Surely that would be enough to work, right? Anyway, they arrive in the next location. For some reason, Ian is separated from the rest of the group, which isn't usually the case when they all teleport at the same time. However, he finds himself right next to a display case with the key inside of it, and also this dead body. He is then knocked out from behind and placed next to it, with the weapon placed in his hands. The key is then stolen by the man who knocked out Ian, and then the episode ends. So what did I think of that episode? Not bad, I guess. It was probably better than the Plants one, but it was still a bit dull at times. The main antagonist was kind of a coward, and there wasn't anything that interesting going on. Regardless though, this next setting is a bit more interesting, and we'll also get about 1.5 episodes of screen time, so that's nice. Upon waking, Ian is immediately accused of both murder and theft. The fact he's found unconscious in the room doesn't really mean much, as the officers assume he was simply betrayed by his accomplice. Due to the legal system here, Ian is in a very tough spot.
You must prove that I did the actual killing.
That is contrary to our legal system.
What?
The punishment for this crime is death, so Ian will need a good lawyer. He is asked if he knows anyone in the city who can defend him.
Who is he? Who? He's a doctor.
Everyone's finally in the same place again, with these four coming to visit Ian, followed by the doctor who then enters, who has been conveniently studying the laws of the city. This means that while everyone else was facing off against killer plants and harsh cold and this very creepy guy, the doctor was busy in law school, which I'm sure some people would argue is worse, but I'm not sure I would. The court proceeding is happening immediately, and the doctor will be representing Ian. It's cut short, however, as the doctor immediately asks for time to gather the evidence. The prosecution opposes this, but the judges agree.
The crime of murder in Millennius is in itself unusual. Then I grant you 2 days.
It turns out the reason the doctor was studying the laws is because Ibram had been murdered, Altus's friend who had skipped ahead to this city. Apparently, that was his corpse at the beginning of the episode, and he and the doctor had agreed to take the key and meet up, but someone had betrayed Ibram and killed him. This means the doctor's only been studying the laws since Ian arrived, basically, which really isn't that long, I don't think. So before this, he really was just relaxing, I guess. The doctor, Barbara, and Susan all go to the murder scene. Back in the room the murder happened, Taron, the lead investigator, states that the key can't have left the room, since the sensor would have detected it if it did. Therefore, they think Ian might have hid it somewhere in this room, but they can't find where. The doctor, in a rare show of genius, I mean rare for this version of the doctor, thinks he's already discovered where the key is, as well as who the murderer is.
Taron never doubted that Chesterton was guilty. A grave error, yes. A very grave error.
Yes, whereas we know he's innocent.
Playing out the crime, and realizing there'll be no time for the murderer to escape the murder scene, they determined that the most likely theory is that the first person to find the body was the killer. They therefore suspect the relief guard, and the doctor sends Barbara and Susan to interrogate him. They arrive, have a brief conversation with the man's wife, and then when he arrives, he immediately tries to kick them out.
I thought you might like to know that we know where the key is hidden.
But you couldn't know where it is.
Once again, I have to say, the antagonist in this story, not so good. As they leave, they overhear him hissing his wife, and then see him trying to contact someone before they're chased off. We then see the person being contacted is the prosecutor.
You really think she knows something? You mean that our young friend may not be able to go through with it?
Together, they form a plan. We then cut to the court, where the case continues. Using the fake key they got from that statue earlier, the doctor gets Sabitha to pretend that it's the real one, and the relief guard gave it to her. This causes him to panic and admit to his guilt, but before he can admit to who he was working with, he is killed. This unfortunately doesn't exonerate Ian, since he could have very easily been working alongside the relief guard as his accomplice.
The unfortunate death of Guardian Eden has surely not affected the issue.
But it does lead them closer to finding the truth. The relief guard's wife was hysterical, so she was sent home to rest. Susan also left to get Ian's statement. The case isn't going well though, as the judges aren't willing to give the doctor more time, and they get 2 messages. A note saying there'll be another murder if they disclose where the key is, and a call from Susan, who is a hostage.
They're going to kill me.
Susan?
Barbara decides to keep this information for the doctor, as she doesn't want him worrying about this while he's trying to absolve Ian's name. She decides to go to the wife of the relief guard, since they know that the kidnapping is likely connected to the murder, and therefore the kidnapper might be someone that the relief guard was previously in contact with. She is unable to help though, as her husband had been very secretive with who he was talking to.
And I sympathize with you. You must have been sick with worry since you spoke to Susan, but I just can't help you. I know nothing.
5 minutes later.
Carla said you must have been sick with worry since you spoke to Susan. Well, how did she know we'd spoken to Susan? We've told no one.
The three of them rush back into the room and stop her just before she's about to murder Susan. As it turns out, she was likely the one who contacted the prosecutor, and probably the one who murdered her own husband.
You mean that our young friend may not be able to go through with it? I'll tell you what you may have to do.
Speaking of him, the prosecutor then goes to the doctor and congratulates him on how well he defended Ian, even though it wasn't enough. They send Carla, the wife, in. However, she states that her accomplice was Ian Chesterton. At this point, even Taryn, who was previously 100% certain Ian did it, is starting to suspect that something's wrong. However, this won't be enough to ask for a stay of execution. They still have no definitive evidence who the real culprit is. However, Susan mentions that she heard his voice over the phone.
Just that he'd collect the key later and then pick her up.
Collect the key?
As a final gambit, the group decides to stay behind, hoping the doctor's right about where the key is hidden, and try and catch the person before they can retrieve it. They hide in the main room where the evidence cabinet is, at which point someone sneaks in to retrieve something from it. They capture him and close the case. As it turned out, the prosecutor and the relief guard had both banded together to steal the key and sell it, and they had hid it inside the mace. Admittedly, I'm kind of wondering what would have happened if Ian wasn't there. A big part of their plan kind of hinged on the fact that there was someone there to pin the blame on, so they could hide the mace on them and then have it used as evidence. As Taryn admits that he never once considered that Ian could be innocent, the doctor makes his second reference to meeting a historical figure.
You should read Polo, my boy. He founded skepticism. Great asset to your business.
Well, thank heaven you remembered reading Pirro, Doctor.
Reading? What are you talking about? I met the man.
Now that Ian's name has been cleared, the group is given authority to take the key, since they are using it to rebuild the machine. They then teleport away, seemingly shocking these two. I guess technology really has regressed in the past 2 millennia. Getting back to the island, Altas and Sabitha have already been captured by the Vords. Again, as I said much earlier, I really think the Vords should have been used more as antagonists in this story. It kind of gave me whiplash seeing them again for the first time in so long. Also, this is Yartek. This is our first time meeting him, and there's only 10 minutes left of the story. Even more shockingly, as we're about to discover, Yartek doesn't even know what the keys do.
What purpose does it serve? I'm going to find out in the end.
I think Yartek might genuinely be the worst main antagonist in all of Doctor Who history, and that's including Omega in the most recent episode. He comes in at the last minute, he knows nothing pretty much, he just knows that this machine can control people, and that's literally all the information he has, and he's just come over here, and now he's just trying to figure out how to work the thing. Anyway, he then calls in Sabitha to continue the interrogation. Yep, there it is, ladies and gentlemen. My favorite thing that they couldn't cut out because they had to do everything in one take. I don't even think I'm going to bring this up anymore as an issue, because it peaks here. I don't know if I'll ever need to mention it again. Anyway, Sabitha pretends to bluff, acting like she doesn't care about Altos at all. But Yartek is at least smart enough to call her out on this, threatening to kill him. Then, for some weird reason, when they prove that she cares about him, they instead pivot and decide to threaten her and get Altos to tell them, which he does. He admits that the Doctor has the final key. As the makeup is traveling around, they bump into a Vord, proving that this place is being invaded. We then get some interesting development from the Doctor. Once again, he says that they should probably just go back to the TARDIS, since the force field has been lifted. Now this part, admittedly, is very typically Doctor-like. However, when the others say they should instead make sure Altos and Sabitha are alright, the Doctor doesn't complain, which is a first. The group splits up, with the Doctor and Barbara going to look for Altos and Sabitha, and Ian and Susan going to find Arpatan. The Doctor also grabs a knife off of the Vord they knocked out, which is interesting. I mean, it's honestly not surprising at all for this version of the Doctor, but still I thought it was worth noting. We then get yet another Looney Tunes-esque scene. I swear there are a lot of these in this story.
Alpatan!
Heaven, we were afraid. Have you brought the keys?
Wow, Alpatan, what a weirdly shaped head you have.
Where's Sabitha? Where is the old man? He is the one who has the key.
Wow, Arpitan, what a weird voice you have.
Is he a good man?
What is your impression of him?
There are many races of men on Marinus. He looks and sounds well enough.
Wow, Arpitan, what a weirdly racist outlook you have. Where the hell did that come from? Anyway, when Ian and Susan are clearly weirded out by his behavior, Yartek is smart enough to apologize for his rudeness, claiming his obsession with the keys has made him insensitive to other matters. Still though, Ian fortunately isn't that stupid. He gives him the fake key that they got from the statue earlier. This amuses the Doctor a lot, but it doesn't really amuse Tabitha, who claims that inserting the wrong key will cause it to explode. They all quickly run from the pyramid before that happens. He then cuts them back at the TARDIS. At this point, the Doctor briefly takes Tabitha aside to talk to her privately. He first of all apologizes for her father's death. Again, I really feel like the Doctor's already kind of improving a bit. He then completely goes against what he said in the Dalek story.
You wanted advice, you said. I never give it, never.
In his defense though, he has spent several months in China since then, so I guess that outlook could change. He finally does what every other Doctor would have done well before now, and says that the idea of an AI that can control people's minds is probably not a very good idea.
Machines can make laws, but they cannot preserve justice. Only human beings can do that.
Again, the Doctor specifies humans here, which is annoying, but at this point I just kind of have to accept that when he says humans, he means organic life forms, or sentient life forms. Aldous and Tabitha agree to go back to Marinus to start a new life. They also give the Doctor the last of the keys, as a way to remember this adventure. They then finally leave the island. Once again, we don't see the beginning of the next adventure at the end of this one, so maybe they're done with that for now? It's kind of a shame, but oh well. Anyway, the story ends there. I don't think I can really recommend the story overall. First of all, there's the issue of the middle two episodes, which are both kind of boring. The plans don't make for an interesting antagonist, and neither does this cowardly guy. The two cities they go to, the ones in the second and the fifth episode, are a bit more interesting, but again, the antagonists are just too incompetent for me to really enjoy the stories that much. Then there's the main culprit, Yartek, a guy who has no idea what he's doing. If the group hadn't intervened at all, he would have taken over this island and then had no idea where to go from there, because he wouldn't have had the keys. He scattered the keys across the world to various dangerous locations, yet almost certainly, the vast majority of the people killed trying to get to these locations were Arpitan's own followers. The timeline isn't very clear, but I'd assume it was one of Arpitan's forerunners that scattered the keys. But regardless, it doesn't seem like anyone was trying to get to them other than his own followers, so it doesn't really make much sense. Then there's the matter of where they were placed. One of them was placed in this city, guarded by these weird alien things, who were clearly very hostile and selfish, so why would they be trusted with it? Then there was the one at this lab, which by the way was owned by a guy who seemingly was working for Arpitan, so why didn't he just bring it to him? And the only thing protecting this one were these weird traps everywhere. The plants being hostile was just a weird consequence of this guy's research. Then there's the one in the snowy mountain, guarded by these four guys, which just doesn't really feel that guarded, really. And then there's the one in the city of Marinus, which is really the only one that I think is placed properly. I mean, these guys are incompetent, but they're also like the only ones doing their job. It's a shame, because if it wasn't really clear, I do like a couple of these settings. Again, mainly the cities. Especially the first city. That was genuinely a very good episode, up until the point where the brains were just immediately defeated, because they brought a human into their room, where they exist as brains in glass jars. Of course they're gonna get killed. Overall, this was a very interesting story, and one I kind of recommend purely based on that, but in terms of being a good story, this is probably the worst one so far. The only other positive I really have to say is I'm surprised by how well this episode uses Chekhov's gun. They introduced the fake key in the third episode, and then it comes back a couple times after that, in really interesting ways, so that's cool. Overall though, between the length of the story, and also it generally not being that amazing, I do think this is the one I recommend the least so far. Well, that was a long video, so do I have any concluding thoughts? Well, for one thing, I do think the Doctor's changing. As I've mentioned previously, the Doctor was basically the main antagonist for the first two stories. At the very least, he was the one causing most of the problems. He's the one who kidnapped everyone, sending them back to prehistoric times. And he's also the one who tricked the group into going to the Dalek city, getting them kidnapped and involved in all of that nonsense. This is changing though. In the third story, while the Doctor was certainly hostile to Ian and Barbara at various points, he wasn't the main cause of the problem. I mean, he kind of was, but I don't think he could have really done anything about it. And by the end, he does solve the problem. In the fourth story, while he does sulk for a while, he is generally quite competent. He's the one who fixes the TARDIS and helps them get away. While he doesn't really appear that much to try and negotiate with Marco, he also doesn't really do anything to screw the group over, so he's definitely improving there. Then there's the fifth story, and okay, fair enough. The Doctor was kind of a dick by going to the final city himself, abandoning everyone else to go through all of these dangerous places without him. However, he absolutely wasn't the cause of any conflict, and by the end, he was the one who solved the mystery. He was absolutely crucial in that episode. It's like the first time the Doctor has been purely a force for good. Anyway, the only other thing I have to say is, I included less of the funny scenes in this video. To avoid this video from being too long and tedious, I kind of had to cut some of them. So I'm just going to say here, I find these episodes quite funny, unironically. I know I poke a lot of fun at scenes that aren't meant to be funny, but genuinely, overall I think this is well written and quite funny when it needs to be. Anyway, that's all I had to say for this video. In my next one, I'm definitely going to be covering the Aztecs and the Sensorites. I might also include the Reign of Terror, in which case I'll be done with season 1, but no promises there. Anyway, if you made it this far, then surely you got something out of this, so please consider liking and subscribing, and I'll see you next time.